Hello and welcome to the King Heroes Journey podcast. My name is Beth Martins, and I have the great honor and pleasure of hosting Mr. Luke Storey today. Welcome, Luke. So glad to have you.
Great to see you again, albeit
Fantastic.
remotely. What instrument was Liam playing in the introduction there?
Oh, thank you for asking. Yeah, that is my son. He calls himself Psycho on YouTube, and I'll share a link to that. He is playing a signature Tim Henson nylon string electric guitar.
Oh, it's really interesting sounding. I was trying to place it. It's like, wow, that's obviously a stringed instrument, but it didn't exactly sound like a guitar or mandolin. I couldn't figure it out. That's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a proud mama. So, yeah,
I
thanks to
bet.
Liam. Yeah, and I will, for the sake of just his lovely addition to this podcast, I've got an outro for him as well. I'm going to share his YouTube channel so people could go and sub to him. He is famous for his, he calls it Guitars, Guns, and Knives channel.
My kind of guy.
There you go. There you
That's
go.
hilarious.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny that I'm a proud mama for that reason, but it's yeah. No, I just loved it when he took it very independent interest in all of those things and ran with them. You know, it's easy to conclude that I don't know when kids don't want to learn and they're just learning things or about things they're actually not interested in at all, and it looks like there might be no aptitude there or they're late bloomer or something like that. But I noticed how he just, as soon as there was an interest, he dove in at the deep end and self-taught the whole entire way and got to that level in such a short time, actually. It's
That's
insane.
incredible.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
It makes me feel bad though, because I was listening to, I mean, not really, but I was listening to some songs I recorded, just working on songwriting like back in 2002 and some other ones in 2007. And I was listening back, just playing like acoustic guitar. And I was listening to it and I go, I haven't really gotten any better. It's like, even some of the things I was playing then, I'm like, I don't even think I have the chops for that now. So it's funny with music. I think one really, unless you're just naturally insanely gifted, one really does have to commit themselves to make any significant progress. But that was funny. I was like, wow, it was a lot of years ago. And it's not like now I'm Jimi Hendrix or something. It's like, still kind of at the same level, but I'm not trying to make anything of it, thankfully, but it's a fun observation.
Right, right. Yeah. And the thing is that the better you get, the more work you need to maintain that level. So yeah, you can see there's a lot of artists who relax their style and they really can't do what they did before. Bruce Cockburn being one of those, I think, although he's no slouch at any level. But yeah. No, I feel like I passed the torch. My guitar playing, I have the instruments to see back there, but not a whole lot of learning going on. I just can barely maintain to play my own songs. So. All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is going to be a fantastic conversation. I forgot to ask you, Luke, if you had any limit on your time, but you could let me know if that was the case.
I'm golden.
That's awesome. And I'll say how much I enjoyed being in your live studio there in May. And it was already like hot as heck in Texas. We thought maybe the spring was going to be a little bit less. Is it still a steamy place there right now?
I'm actually really enjoying the summer here. I think because in contrast to last year, this is pretty mild. Last year, 2023, we had, as they say here, triple digits. It was over 100 degrees for over 90 days straight consecutively. That is obviously including nighttime. So there was just no escape, to the point where my wife Allison and I, after that last fall, we were like, okay, next summer we're I don't care where we're going, but we're going somewhere for July and August. If we have to sleep in a homeless shelter, we don't care. Like, we're out of here. And we planned and planned and planned, and we just could not get the damn thing off the ground to leave this summer. And I was kind of nervous about that. And as it ended up, it's actually been beautiful. It only just recently, in the last week or so, got in the 100 range. But if it's only like that for couple of weeks, it's it's tolerable. 3 months begins to feel like house arrest, right? It's just like I feel like the Tate brothers, It's like, I just you, know, you can't leave your house. I'm like, oh, I kind of know what that feels like. You don't have an ankle bracelet, but you can't walk the dog because the dog's feet will get burned. It's a strange experience. I've never lived anywhere where it was that insane. But anywho, I'm grateful to be anywhere. As Keith Richards says, I'm happy to be here. Well, I'm happy to be anywhere.
I love that.
I would
That's awesome.
subscribe to that too.
Very good. So I would love to introduce you, unless you prefer to introduce yourself.
Oh, God, no.
Okay. All right. Very good. Yeah. So Luke is the host of the Lifestyle podcast since 2016. He has 13 million downloads on that podcast. And I have had the great pleasure of connecting with many of your people that came my way through your interview of me. And I'll probably grab a link to that as well. He is a leading voice in personal development, spirituality, cutting edge health innovations. As a renowned speaker, author, and top podcast host, Luke shares unfiltered insights and thoughtful analysis drawn from extensive research and immersion in diverse spiritual and healing modalities. Delivering long form interviews. I know that for a fact. I think we went 3 hours and 20 minutes. We beat Alex Jones.
Totally. I don't even know how people do hour-long podcasts. I would lose my mind trying to have a meaningful conversation in 60 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it's a real luxury, I find. There's no cap on the amount of time that you can spend. It's just based on mutual availability. So it's really wonderful.
That's true.
Yeah. And so I do highly recommend the Lifestyle podcast. There's so many interesting shows on there, and the topics range from alternative health, spirituality, personal development, and Luke illuminates a path to deeper meaning, emotional freedom, physical vitality, with a direct and relatable style.
Thank God for copywriters. Just to clarify, Beth, for anyone that tries to find it, obviously they'll click your show notes or whatever, but it's the LifeStylist podcast.
Did I not say that?
You said lifestyle.
Oh, I missed it because I do know that well.
Potato, but
No.
just in case someone searches for it and they're like, "What? That doesn't exist."
You should see how people mangle my podcast name. It's the King's Hero Journey and the King, or all kinds of things. My dad also had a business. Nobody could remember the name for some reason. It was pretty straightforward, but they always got it weird somehow. And so on the Lifestyle podcast, Lifestylist podcast, there I went and tried to do it again. He's spent 27 years refining the ultimate wellness, lifestyle, and spiritual philosophy for personal growth and healing. His passion, purpose, and gift are to articulate transformative principles of spirituality, addiction recovery, and human health optimization. Luke empowers audiences to break through barriers, awaken to higher states of consciousness, and embrace a life of joy, liberation, and connection to the divine. His expertise spans alternative medical modalities, plant medicine, and psychedelic therapies, which I want to dive into a little bit, quantum healing, Kundalini yoga, breathwork, and meditation, innovative approaches to addiction recovery, which is the focus of today's podcast, and conscious relationships. In 2024, The Lifestylist remains one of the leading wellness podcasts with a diverse fan base of millions of devoted listeners. It's one of the top rated and most downloaded shows in its category, often reaching the iTunes top 20. That's amazing. And finally, his debut memoir, which I want to talk about, definitely A Horse Named Lonesome, will be published in 2025. And you can find Luke at lukestorey.com. Nice and simple. I love that when it's just your name. So I'm going to post that in the chat for anyone who wants to click on it. And Michelle, really nice to see you. She says it's nice to see Luke again.
Hey, Michelle.
Yeah, Michelle as well. Welcome to Yvonne. And there's and Michelle posted a direct link to your podcast. So that's very nice of her. Appreciate that. Feel free to share this out. I am Shadowband. I had Curtis Stone on the other day, and the views were less than the viewers, like the people on the live stream. So YouTube just hacked it right back, and it's this is a new channel. I've been kicked off of one. I just heard of the Missing Link. They just lost their fifth channel. The war goes on, and
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I just got shockingly, my first ever official strike from Communist Tube. Uh, and I was like, oh, it must have been, one of my old Alex Jones or David Icke or one of these contrarian guests. And it was actually a post I did about colloidal silver. I was like, you guys. So I went to appeal it, and I just went into Chat GPT, and I was like, give me 10 PubMed studies that validate that silver is antimicrobial, because that was the timestamp that they seem to be bothered by. Within 3 seconds, Chat GPT is like, boom, here's all the proof. Submitted that with an appeal. It's like, who knows if it'll work, but it's the censorship stuff, man, is crazy. And it's so interesting that I mean, I don't really follow politics, in any meaningful way, but it's interesting that that's not a bigger talking point as something that is so detrimental to society. You would think some of the political, the people in power, the people aspiring to be in power, would use that as a selling point. Like, we're going to do something about this because it's, as you know, and I'm sure so many people listening know, it's one of the first dominoes to fall before, the rest of them. And I'm also, I've got I've never been kicked off of any platforms except TikTok. I was recently kicked off TikTok, and I was like, geez, I wonder what it could have been, because TikTok allows some pretty racy stuff. And I had a guest on who manufactures supplements. And in this particular clip, he said, we really use high quality ingredients. We don't get like cheap stuff from China. Yeah. And that just got me totally nuked off TikTok. No possibility of an appeal or anything. Thankfully, I only had like 5 followers on TikTok or something. I mean, a few more, but not many. And then Instagram has me in jail right now because I posted a meme of a bunch of very corrupt, parasitic politicians, just kind of like a collage of 10 faces or something, both, left and right, just baddies. And the meme said, no one is above the law. And it was just like all of these obvious criminals that have been implicated in various war crimes and other crimes of many different natures. And it got flagged as sexually explicit or pornography or something like that. And I thought, that's weird. Everyone was dressed. And then I looked closer, and there is a little tiny picture of Hunter Biden in his underwear from one of his crack smoking videos or something. And so apparently, you can't make fun of politicians on Instagram either. It's just crazy. So.
wow, yeah, I get constant reports from my son about what he's seeing on Instagram, and thank God he's almost an adult now and can really keep his wits about him. But there's a ton of stuff that should be censored, like by woke standards. It's racist, it's hatred, it's hate speech, it's all of those crazy things, but they just let these channels keep on going. And what is that? I've never been censored on Instagram myself, but I don't have a rock star audience there. I don't think I'm much of a threat. But just start making sense. No, not now.
Yeah, I think it's like with everything in that sort of top-down model of power, it's almost it seems like inefficiency because the rules are so arbitrary. But the more conspiratorial side of me is like, they make it crazy and nonsensical just to drive everyone crazy, right? It's like, if you read the community guidelines, it's like, wow, actually I didn't break that. There's no like communication, right? There's no way to actually really appeal and get to a human being. And so it's all very kind of nonsensical or arbitrary, contradictory. Some things get by that shouldn't, some things that should get by don't. It's like crazy making, just like my webcam is doing crazy making right now. Maybe they're listening and making me blurry. But anyway, I mean, I take it all with a grain of salt. It's just, it's an interesting time to be alive, wherein
It
you
really is.
can't really speak your mind publicly unless you want to be penalized. And for your average person who, has a job somewhere and their social media is not part of their livelihood, I guess it wouldn't be as meaningful. But when you're a content creator and your livelihood is in some part tied to your ability to reach people independently as a source of media, it's definitely problematic.
It really is. Yeah, it really is. Oh, something's not working somewhere. I think we're okay on most of the platforms. Might be Vigilante TV. We're all live on Rumble and X and Facebook and Rockfin. I shared a link here as well, but it looks like Vigilante TV is not going to work this day. That's all right. Yeah, I was just going to say that when you start, say after, how do you, neuf, onze, if we use some code words for those kind of things. I don't know if it's quite a strike button or trigger word these days, but since then, just for example, with the airports, I would be a person that I'm a two minds. I got the rebel side of me, but I've also got the side of me that wants to just have a nice day and not have a lot of complications and run into a lot of trouble. But what I noticed very early on is that you can't just learn the rules and have an easy time. It's not like that. Like every single port that you go to, every single security entrance you go to, every single security person has different rules, right? That I think I told you I'm a marked woman on my passport now, and we've come through the US a couple of times. When we came back from Texas, it was amazing. If there are three good people left in an authority position on the Border Patrol side of Canada, I met all three of them that night, and they treated us like customers, like we were, someone that they wanted to serve and serve quickly and efficiently and happily. And I'm like, oh, wow, all that praying and releasing worked like crazy because I didn't know what we were in for in the middle of the night. We also just came through from North Dakota, did a little road trip, and coming back on the Boys Vein side, the guy just looked at us and he went, "You're free to go." They actually should search me because my passport says this is a person, this is a bad one. And he obviously had the power to not do that. So yeah, it keeps you in that confusion, always a little hyper vigilant, a little stressed out. For me, it's good because it makes me do a lot of inner work. But it's just,
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah. I mean, I think when you're interfacing with the matrix at large, it's a choose your battles kind of game, right? It's like what nervous system disruption is worth the fight, you know?
totally.
Also, I think like with the censorship in social media, something that I've grappled with a bit is, wanting to be authentic and be honest about my perspective on things. Um, but if I were to do so in a very overt way and get deplatformed from every social media channel, then I might be reaching the very few people that are open to the ideas I want to share that are more controversial. But if all my accounts get nuked, then I'm reaching no one, and so my impact is zero. At least as far as those channels. So that's something since 2020, I was kind of like, about to post them, and I go, wow, I really think this could be helpful to get this information out. But then the next 10 posts I do that are less controversial and probably, hopefully, helpful to some people won't be seen. So it's like that balance of wanting to keep it real, but also keep your accounts alive. And luckily I've been fortunate and only just gotten a few dings and warnings and restrictions here and there. Where like our mutual friend Alex Zek, I think he's on his 10th Instagram account or something. He just like keeps pushing it. Boom, deleted. Boom, deleted. And that's one route for the courageous. But I like the history that I've built up on those platforms. I put a lot of care and energy and creativity into them. So, there's definitely an attachment there that I have just based on the amount of work that's gone into curating the content.
Exactly. And people are hard on social media and they'll put it down and then they're there anyway. Or, I affectionately call Facebook fake book. But when it comes down to it, it's the people, right? It's the people that are there. And your skill at being honest and authentic means you're going to attract people that resonate with that, that actually value what you have to say and offer. And so it's gold to be able to put a message out and have, even if it's totally shadow banned, but somehow people just end up, the right people see the right things, and you can still connect to a whole different world. If they shut it down, I would be, say I couldn't access the internet anymore, my whole entire life would change 100%. And I don't know how exactly I'd do it. I'm really tied into technology. I would find a way, because where there's a will, there's a way. But yeah, wow, it's so fun. I definitely want to geek out on podcasting with you too. But let's dive in, and please tell us, why is sobriety not enough when it comes to healing addiction?
That's a great question. I think I've been sober now 27 years, and we can talk
Amazing.
about how I define that perhaps later in the conversation, because as you mentioned earlier, I have had some really powerful and positive experiences with psychedelics while in sobriety. But I think when I was in active addiction, it seemed like all of the problems that I had internally, emotionally, mentally, and the manifestation of that inner turmoil in my external life in terms of relationships and employment and the ability to care for myself and my finances and all of that. I mean, I would have put my hand on a Bible and sworn that every problem I had was because I was addicted to all these different drugs and alcohol. And I knew that I wasn't the type of addict that was able to live in denial of that. Some people have pretty glaringly obvious addiction issues known by all except them, but they won't or can't admit it or see it. I wasn't of that class. I mean, I definitely felt a lot of shame and frustration around my inability to control my use or to, curtail it in any way, let alone stop altogether. But I had this fantasy kind of for the past, the last few years of my, really bad addiction period, where it was kind of like I use the analogy sometimes you might have seen in a cartoon, where there's a little canoe that's going down a river and there's a giant waterfall, that they can't quite see yet. And they're about to fall over that waterfall. And only you, as the viewer of said cartoon, know that they're about to die. That's kind of how it was. But I sensed that, like, one of these days, like, something really bad is going to happen, And so I had this idea that someday I'm going to have to get sober, but it's just not yet, not yet, not yet, ad infinitum. But I held that idea that once I would finally kind of hit bottom and be able to hopefully get sober, that all of my problems would go away. I mean, I just felt like, God, everything is so obviously rooted in my addiction. And what happened was, thankfully, just through grace, truly, I was able to get sober when I was 26 years old. And I became quickly and acutely aware that all of the problems in my life continued despite the fact that I was physically sober. And so the way I look at it now is more based on the definition of sober. And if you look up sober in the dictionary, with which I used to look up all the words, in the 12-step recovery programs, and I would do all these word studies and deep dives into the history. And if you look up the word sober in the dictionary, you'll get a definition something like this. The first part says not intoxicated, and then it says of sound mind, sanity, rational judgment. Basically just says you're a sane person. And that's, people use the term, for example, sober as a judge. It doesn't mean the judge hasn't had a drink. It means the judge has discernment and prudence and logic and is able to be rational and make sound decisions, right? So based on that, just having drugs and alcohol removed from my life didn't improve my moral character. It didn't give me more clarity of thought, the ability to make better decisions. I mean, some of the external chaos in my life normalized in the sense, well, I could hold a job barely. I could, get a little apartment and pay my bills. I could finally get a car and, be responsible enough to get my registration and just basic life skills, barely attainable though, if I'm really honest at that time. I was just an infant in terms of how you operate as an adult, even though I was 26. But so many of the inner problems that were at the root of my addiction really bubbled to the surface, and it was a very rude awakening because, as I said, I really held on to this idea that if I could just get sober, that like I would make money and get a beautiful girlfriend and be successful by whatever measure that would have been meaningful to me at the time. And so looking at it now, I look at the more holistic interpretation or definition of what sobriety actually is, what it is to be a sober person, to be sane, but also sobriety as it pertains to different areas of one's life. So even as I started to practice different, spiritual practices and meditation and yoga and what didn't used to be called breath work, but, pranic healing. I mean, I could go on and I did, 1,000 different things to improve myself. And I did. But even many, many years into my sobriety, even though I had become much more functional in numerous categories of life, I would not have been able to say that I was financially sober or sexually sober or emotionally sober, right? There were still parts of my life that were very unmanageable. And so I think if you take someone who's truly an addict or alcoholic, and let's say they're a dishonest person, or even maybe to the extreme, they're a thief, and you get them sober, now you have a sober liar or a sober thief, right? It's the refinement and the evolution of one's consciousness that is necessary to not only maintain sobriety, but to get there in the first place. So it's kind of a catch 22. It's like you can't get sober because you lack the resources unto yourself, just based on your willpower. So in my case, and in most people I know, you reach out to a higher power, to God, you ask for help. And then if you're lucky and you're blessed, the physical cravings and kind of the use of the substances might subside, but then the underlying causes start to reveal themselves, and then that requires a whole other set of levels of surrender and spiritual work to overcome those things that made you an addict in the first place. So it's like you need a spiritual experience to get your initial sobriety, but if you don't continue to have an ongoing spiritual experience, the sobriety either won't last, or the other areas of your life will eventually begin to fall apart. I mean, this is just my experience. I can't say what will or won't happen for other people, but that, to answer your question in a very broad sense, is why physical sobriety, at least for me, is not enough, because I proved over and over and over again that I could be physically sober but still completely insane.
Nicely said. I like how you capped that. Yeah, and so there's the whole bunch of things I want to ask about that. Just the reality of dry drunks, right? They don't, maybe it's unique to alcohol, or I don't know if you've seen that in other kinds of addictions as well, where the substance isn't there, but all of the mannerisms, like they literally act drunk. For example,
Yeah.
I've met those people.
Yeah.
And
I used to joke with my friends. We would, and even though I was guilty of this for a long time myself, of being a dry drunk, when we'd see someone like that in our community, we'd say, "Man, that guy's a fire hazard." They're so dry.
ah,
Yeah.
there you go.
Well, the thing is when someone, even if you take someone of a really high moral character, right, who maybe, someone who got into drugs and alcohol later in life, but they were a pretty solid person. They were a person of integrity and like some virtue, right? And then get them addicted to drugs and alcohol for a few years. because the addiction puts you in such a base animal survival state of being that it's impossible to be in that state of being without degrading your moral character. And so, in order to operate in the world isn't built for people who are dependent on drugs and alcohol. So, you have to kind of create your own world. And to create that own world, it's inherently imbued with lies and deception and manipulation and, anger, resentment, rage, selfishness, self-centeredness, jealousy. The seven deadly sins just kind of emerge out of your character when you're an addict. And so, to me, the dry drunk scenario, which I'm very intimately familiar with, and I'm not immune to it now, right? I mean, I definitely lose my shit at times. I go, okay, we used to call it untreated alcoholism, right? Because alcoholism can be treated in a number of ways. One of the ways you can treat alcoholism is by drinking alcohol, and it works, but it has really bad side effects. So, it's not something I think that like, oh, I'm cured, I'm never going to be a dry drunk again. I would say, much less so than ever before in my life. But without the change of character, and even like in the 12 steps, the second step, step 2, says you're restored to sanity, right? So it's like, just not drinking alcohol doesn't restore you to sanity. There's a lot of other work that has to be done in order to, restore or build, some character, so that there's a moral framework of principles that one tries to live by. And for me, I know the more I adhere myself to those principles, to, my moral framework, the higher degree of integrity I have. And the higher degree of integrity I have, the more whole and complete I feel. So I don't feel the need to fill it with something outside of myself, because I'm, living my own template for a righteous life. And so a dry drunk to me is someone who has not addressed their character defects. And if that goes on long enough, I've witnessed this in countless, sober addicts and alcoholics. If the character defects aren't addressed, and if one's moral character isn't refined and matured and developed, it's going to start to be really uncomfortable, and it gets so uncomfortable that many people relapse, and a lot of that has to do with just the arrogance of the human ego and the resistance to truth that the ego has, right? All of the defenses. And you see this a lot with people who have been sober a really long time, sometimes in 12-step meetings, right? They'll be like, they call him an old timer. The guy over in the corner has been sober 35 years and is just like, doesn't have anything you want, right? It's just crusty, dry, a bit bitter, doesn't seem to have a lot of joy. And, that's something that any of us could fall prey to, is sort of being crystallized at a certain point and stopping your spiritual development. And then, the ego will sort of form an identity around being a sober person and being someone who's sober for X amount of years, and use that as an excuse to stop, developing and learning and growing. It's a really painful place to be. I mean, as I said, everything I'm saying is like things I've experienced. I'm not, definitely not casting judgment. I'm casting projection from my own subjective experience, of having gone through these different sort of epochs of sobriety and periods of being more dry or less or more connected to my recovery and my spiritual life.
Right. Oh, hey, Corinne has a good question. What's an example of a character defect? You talked about morals.
Yeah, I mean, a character defect, I mean, there's the classics. I mean, a big one for addicts and alcoholics is resentment, right? Which is the root of that word. To resend is to refeel. So say, my mailman right here outside comes and throws a package on the ground, and they break whatever's inside of it. A normal response would be to be irritated, maybe to be a little bit angry, like, oh, God damn it, I wish they'd be more careful. A resentment is where I invite that thought into the mind, and I start reliving it and rehashing it over and over and over again, to the point where I can't stop thinking about it. So resentment is a big one, because anger is a natural emotion, right? It's like, how do we process that in our nervous system, in our body, and how do we communicate our anger or displeasure to whoever it is that seemed to be, involved in what made us angry. But anger is meant to be something in a healthy person with a healthy nervous system. You get angry, you shake it off, and you move on. You don't think about it for the next 2 weeks or 10 years or 40 years. So resentment would be a classic, alcoholic or addict character defect. Dishonesty, being, whether it's just superficially inauthentic and phony, or if it's actually being manipulative and intentionally deceiving people for your own selfish gains. Selfishness, I think, is probably, selfishness and self-centeredness are probably, I don't know if you could find a core, but I would say those are kind of the foundational character defects of alcoholism and addiction. Because again, when you're living in that survival state of desperation, it's virtually impossible to not create a worldview that isn't completely and totally based on self, because all of your energies and your thought processes have to go into fortifying your own safety and security, or your perceived version of that, right? So it's like everyone else comes second, third, fourth, fifth. The self is always first, because that's what's necessary in order to keep the game going, to protect oneself from possibly breathing a moment sober. It's like, oh man. Yeah. The funny thing too about like dry drug, this is great. I'm thinking of all these things I haven't thought about in a long time. I used to ponder this idea that if being sober in and of itself felt good to an alcoholic or an addict, we would just do it. So if it feels bad, what is it about being sober that is so unlivable and untenable? That
Mhm.
means there's something else there that needs to be addressed in order to be able to live your life without those crutches and still have some semblance of peace and happiness and joy and all of those things. But yeah, back to the character defects. I was just emailing someone about this today. I got an email from a podcast listener, and he said, it's funny. My wife turned me onto your podcast, and I would listen to it, and I would just hate you. You just annoyed me so bad. And then, I started looking at that, and I realized it's because I was jealous. And he's a
Mm.
sober guy. He said, I'm in recovery too, blah, 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 and I was like, oh, that's so cool. And so I was answering his email saying, oh man, that's great. I don't do what I do to be liked. I could get people to like me a lot better by behaving myself. But it reminded me at a character defect that I'll catch in myself sometimes. And that is thankfully not often, but every once in a while, I will look at someone who I consider a peer, someone who kind of does what I do in the same space, and I'll be angry at them or annoyed at them, and I'm just like pissed off that they're successful or they appear to be more successful than I am, and I'll start comparing myself to them. So that would be the character defect of envy. It's like I resent them because they have something that I want. And I feel like, well, I don't feel like it, but the ego feels like I'm more deserving of it because I'm smarter, more talented. I've been at this thing longer. I have more wisdom, whatever grandiose, narcissistic kind of ideas the ego comes up with, but that's a classic right there. It's just when you find yourself annoyed by someone because of their success, I mean, that's a really good indication that there's some envy there. So yeah, I could go on and on. I mean, the character defects, I'm very familiar with them because they cause one's life to be so miserable, and I think I would be completely controlled by character defects if I had never learned what they are and developed some skill at being able to identify them, and having a relationship with God that enables me to surrender them to God when I start to observe them. Because the thing about character defects too that's interesting is they're very difficult to just will away on your own. Like I might be pissed at the mailman, and then that thought kind of virus catches me at some point and I can't stop thinking about, I'm going to report them next time they come over. I'm devising all these plans how I'm going to punish them or get them back or whatever. If that thing grabs hold, at least to an alcoholic like me, if it really catches on, there's no way I'm going to be able to undo it, just because of the tenacity of the mind and the ability of it to just grip something like a pit bull. And so if I can't get rid of it, then something or someone else has to do the heavy lifting. And that's where, praying to have those character defects removed is so useful. For me in the beginning, in the first few years, I mean, I would pray my ass off and it would still be there. It's like the prayers weren't working, but it wasn't because God lacked the power to remove, say, a resentment from me. It's just that there was still a part of the ego that wasn't willing to completely surrender that and to have the humility to acknowledge my own limitations and to have the compassion to acknowledge other people's limitations, and that, the mailman was just doing the best they could and yada, yada, right? Maybe they didn't, it was an accident. There's so many stories the mind makes up. I love the work of Byron Katie, how she'll be like, she has these 4 questions, what happened? Is it true? Can you really know that it's true? Who would you be if you didn't believe that was true? And so on. So a lot of the unraveling of those character defects for me is just being honest with myself and not giving so much credence to the mind. In other words, like I made a t-shirt that says, don't believe everything you think. I mean, the mind is just, it's an absolute shit show. So many of us live our whole lives in the mind, it's like this autonomous thing. It produces its own ideas. And then we grab those and think, yeah, that's right. And then we run with it. Meanwhile, it's completely fallacious and deleterious to our own well-being and to our relationships. And so I think that's a really kind of challenging part about character defects, is there's so many levels of just first identifying them, having the humility to admit that we're actively using them. And then the real test is, the full and complete surrender, where we're really willing to let God remove that from our lives, even if that was a coping mechanism that we feel that we need in order to survive.
Mm-hmm.
You're asking yourself to give up things that are seemingly critical to your very existence. Well, if I'm not angry at people will take advantage of me. You know what I mean? Meanwhile, that's not you could just apply self-love, self-respect, self-esteem in your relationships, healthy boundaries, and so on, then you would be impervious to people hurting you, right? So there's always like an inverse of the character defect too. There's a spiritual principle on the flip side of that coin that can be applied in its place that actually works more effectively without any side effects or harm whatsoever.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's very cool. Yeah, the identification with a whole variety of things. Like it could be your mind itself. It could be the pain that you're in. It could be the experiences you've been through. They all feel to be who we are because they've been around as long as we can remember. And so that it's like, oh, you want me to like let go of my leg or my head, or this kind of thing takes place. But when you really study and you look and you see, is that me? And the acid test is always, could you let it go? Because you can't let go of what's actually you. So yeah,
Yeah,
you said
very
a
well
lot there.
said. I remember one of my mentors years ago. This is, man, probably my first 2 or 3 years of sobriety. He was trying to convey what is so obvious to me now, that there's a you and then there's a mind, and that we're so identified with that mind that we begin, to your point, that we over time we believe that's who we are. And so the way he demonstrated that, he said, Luke, you ever been like sitting in a room and you're just chilling, and there's like a part of you that's looking at yourself chilling in the room? I said, yeah, I've had that thought. And he said, well, who's the one watching? Who's the you seeing you, right? And then we, those of us that are meditators, of course, know there's a witness, kind of point of awareness that is observing the phenomenon of thoughts, sensations, feelings, emotions, right? Well, who's the one witnessing? That's what I want to know. That's the guy I want to be right here in this conversation, right? How much can that be the driver, the pure awareness, call it the soul, higher self, whatever, but let's just say awareness as consciousness. How much of my life can I live from that? And that's that crucial gap of separation, right? So the mailman drops the package out there. Over time, what's been so beneficial to me is building my relationship as the witness observer. There's most of the time a me that's aware when that thought comes in and says, I'm going to get him. I'll see that and go, hey, that's not me. I'm the one watching the mind do that. And I thank the mind for doing its job. That's what its purpose is to calculate and figure things out, keep the body alive. It tells the ego, okay, we're going to put some emotions in you, put some sensations in your body, and then get you to like build an identity out of that. And then it's going to go off and take care of business. I mean, the mind, the ego, they're doing their job, and this was a huge, like, this is many years, like, because I always thought, okay, I got to stop thinking and I have to kill this ego thing off. It's what's making my life difficult. And I've evolved a lot into more of a harmonious relationship with them and accepting that they're part of my beingness, right? Part of my makeup. And obviously God gave them to me as part of this human form they call Luke for a reason. They must have an intended purpose. We weren't saddled with some kind of entity or something, right? That's like whose job is to make us miserable or make us become addicts or commit suicide. It's like, no, they just, without awareness, they sort of, they outgrow their intended purpose to the point where, as you said, we start to identify as them, as it. And that's when life gets really painful. And also that's when anyone can hurt you at any given time because you take everything personally, right? I mean, that's like classic ego. If you take the credit, you got to take the blame, right? So if you let the compliments and the accolades of the world inflate that ego, then that ego gets so inflated that it's so sensitive that even the most minor slight or critique just cuts to the core. It's a really, I mean, I wish more people in our modern society were able to disidentify from ego, because people would be so much less emotionally sensitive. Everyone is just like in their safe space, man. It's like crazy the things that people get upset by. And I know I've been there. I used to get terribly bothered if people were critical or, anything like that. And I think thankfully now I know when there's a part of me that gets worked up about somebody trolling me online or something. I mean, it's so obvious that the ego is the one who's threatened. It's not actually me. You can't hurt me. I'm an eternal soul just hanging out here for a few years, pretending to be a person so that I can have this experience and, work off some karma and earn some karmic merit and evolve consciousness. I'm just doing my little part. Coming at life from that perspective is just so much more easeful, and also just, you can't be hooked very easily. I mean, every once in a while something like that'll get me and I miss it. I'm like, I'll show them, and I go, shit. But I learned, because every time it hurts so bad. You know what I mean? It's like, if I don't believe in viruses per se, but just because it's a word that or at least not the way that people commonly believe in them. But it's, these thought forms are kind of contagious, right? And if you're living with a lot of ego identification, and somebody else's ego or their pain body comes at you and engages you, and if you don't have the awareness to see from that witness perspective what's happening, and you let your ego then engage with their ego, it's exponentially more difficult to extricate yourself from that entanglement, because now there's two of them that are that are dancing, right? Whereas if it's just me on my own and, the mind starts to wander down a dark street and I kind of observe it and go, no, 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 I'm going to go meditate or, take a walk or do whatever. But I find when I entangle the lower elements of myself with someone else's and I take the bait, it's dangerous. It really hurts. And so I've gotten a lot better at just, allowing people to think and believe whatever they want and to not take things personally.
Mhm.
And also it's like, when you get in, like, I'm thinking, I guess, kind of in online beefs and stuff, or anywhere in life where you perceive someone to be attacking you, it really is more of an indication about their state of consciousness than what it is they're implying about you or accusing you of. It's really just more kind of a beacon for them to broadcast to you, hey, this is the consciousness I'm working with in this moment. And it's very educational, right? And then I can take that information and go, oh, okay, well, then there's going to be either a really kind of rigid boundary between us, or maybe even a boundary where you're not even, in my life at all, or I'm going to adjust that boundary according to how safe I feel you are.
Exactly. Yeah, those boundaries, and I like that what Sherry you said about we teach people how to treat us, and I think that
So true.
yeah, and I think the majority of relationships are not between authentic living beings. They are between, now in my language, I'll just say programs, but it's this. We're talking about the same element here, and yeah, it's all jockeying back and forth between these fear driven entities that are, you're not even there, you're not participating. It's an automation on both sides that compounds bad circumstances and pain and injury, and there's no end to it until you yourself, as that witness, make a new decision, like, oh, this isn't my beautiful relationship and we're going to make some changes here, or at least on my side. And then you can start having some more breakthroughs. um, I was just going to ask you about, there's so much I want to talk about here, um, just about the 12-step program. Did you find that it helped you? Was it useful for you? Were there parts that you're able to take from it that you can use on a daily basis?
Oh man, I mean, my entire life is ultimately, yeah, I mean, the foundation of my life is the teachings of the 12 steps.
Got it.
And, in the beginning, it was it was the most viable route to take for physical sobriety, right? It was like, there's really no other game in town. I mean, religion historically has not been very successful at helping addicts, nor has psychiatry, for example. There's a famous interaction between Carl Jung and the co-founder of AA, Bill Wilson,
Mm.
which is documented in the AA literature, where Carl Jung, just to paraphrase and kind of truncate the whole thing, Carl Jung sends Bill a letter and says, "Yeah, I was trying to treat this guy who Bill knew, and said, yeah, I couldn't help him." It's like I tried everything on this guy and it wouldn't work. I mean, that's Carl Jung. So if Carl Jung can't help you get sober, I don't know that psychology is likely to do so.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, in the beginning, it was okay. Well, this is how you get sober. Anyone that I knew that had escaped addiction did it that way, and so it was more of a, just kind of an act of desperation, right? And then over the 22 years that I was very active in various 12-step programs, I mean, it became so ingrained in me. Not the fellowship part of it per se, although that's important at a certain stage, but just the fundamental universal laws or principles or truths upon which the 12 steps are based. And it's interesting because all of the foundational principles within the 12 steps were not created by the 12 steps, right? I mean, these are just spiritual principles that are timeless. Making amends if you harm someone, being honest to self and others, taking an inventory of your character defects, being willing to have God surrender them, prayer, meditation, being of service to others, surrendering your life to God, turning your life over to God. I mean, all of the, the core teachings, humility, willingness, all these, those are in every kind of, any spiritual sort of framework or religion or teaching is going to have some version of those at its foundation. What I find interesting is that despite these principles being here in this earth realm, presumably since the beginning of time, in our recorded history, and I don't know what happened before recorded history, and who knows how much of recorded history is even true, right? But on record, if you go back, a few centuries, there's no indication that any alcoholics, weren't probably many drug addicts then, but let's just talk about alcoholics, ever got sober by just learning those principles and applying them, which is really fascinating to me. So there's something that is really quite phenomenal happened in 1935 when this one drunk had gotten sober because he had this transformative spiritual experience, kind of like an enlightenment experience, and he gets sober. He's like a street drunk who was once a stockbroker, and he's just like a horrible, like low bottom drunk, can't get sober, goes into a what was then called like a drying out place, which was like a psych ward of a hospital where they would dry out alcoholics. He goes in there, has the spiritual experience, which, by the way, bookmark that for psychedelics later. And he comes out, he stays sober for a little while, but he's on shaky ground. He takes this trip to Akron, Ohio to try and make some big money deal. It falls through. He's about to drink. He gets the idea. I mean, really the birth of the entire 12-step movement is because I believe God put the idea in that guy's head to go to the phone booth in this hotel and start calling, churches, right? And so he starts calling around. Someone puts him in touch with this other guy who's a doctor in town, Dr. Bob. And he calls that guy, goes over to his house, who's also a drunk, goes over to his house. They have a chat about their problems. And the second guy gets sober just from them talking about it, right? And talking about some of these spiritual principles. And then the two of them realize, holy shit, if we keep hanging out and talking and sharing with each other and supporting each other, loving on each other, maybe it'll work for someone else. And thus they start going and, creating meetings around people helping one another with no incentive whatsoever other than to just be helpful and to support one another. And so there were always these spiritual principles, but until this one guy figured out you could take some of these spiritual principles, talk about them with other people in a room, and magically those spiritual principles start to empower the people in the room and they all become sober. It's just bizarre. And then shortly after, he got this kind of download one day where he wrote out the 12 steps. And some of them were borrowed in part from an organization called the Oxford Groups, which was a kind of a non-denominational Christian group that he was a part of before that. So some of the ideas already existed, but he really codified them in a way that elicits a spiritual experience, which is the entire purpose of the 12 steps. In step 12, it says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, which are the 11 steps that came before, now we're, happy, joyous, and free, and we can go be of service to other people, which is the whole point of life in the first place, right? But if you don't have anything to give because you're still suffering yourself, it's, it's difficult to really go all in with the service piece. So to your question, like the teachings of the 12 steps fundamentally are really what drives my whole life and every move I make, but it's done so totally unconsciously, right? It's like, you're like, hey, would you be on my podcast? I'm not thinking, hey, I could apply willingness right now. It's just, I'm just willing, it's just something that's built into my nature. Not that I say yes to everything, but if I say I'm going to show up, I'm going to show up. Like, I'm willing to do it, right? And willingness is such a massive principle. Open-mindedness is another one, right? It's like, God, I mean, each one, you could just unpack each of these core principles for hours. They're so life-changing and so powerful, but reading about them, talking about them, memorizing them is essentially worthless. it's, and I tried it, you know what I mean? Become a 12-step scholar. It's a lot of intellectual knowledge without application. So the word application is something that I learned about 5 years into my sobriety. And that changed everything for me, because then it was like, okay, so let's take a principle like acceptance. Cool. Yeah, I can kind of understand that intellectually, but can I practice acceptance like as a way of being in the world and let go of my attachments to things that I'm trying to avoid or things that I'm trying to attain, right? It's like to truly like use acceptance as a gateway into surrender, because acceptance is more about kind of accepting incidents that happen throughout the day in one's life, right? Or maybe some big things, but underneath that acceptance is surrender, where you're just like letting the whole thing go and having the, you know, the humility to admit that there's a power that created us and created this whole life experience here on earth that might just be a little more intelligent than I am. You know, just be willing to consider, open my mind, think, well, I really think this is how my life is supposed to go. But I can accept that things aren't going my way according to my designs and plans, right? So I start to accept things here and there. And then over time, I see, wow, that thing that I was, you know, to which I was really attached, that I just thought my whole, you know, happiness and livelihood was dependent upon, it doesn't go through the way I thought. And some time passes and I look back and I go, oh, thank God I didn't get what I wanted. That would have been the shittiest outcome ever. I got a way better outcome that I never could have imagined, just because I accepted, you know, incrementally little things that kind of slipped through my fingers, and then ultimately started to surrender the whole of it. So yeah, I mean,
Nice.
to me, the 12 steps are just like, they're in my DNA.
Nice, nice. And I think they really are actually all of the virtues in my perspective, in my observation, we came pre-programmed with that. Programming is the wrong word, but installed, or, you know, we got that stuff. We have the virtues. There's just so much that sits on top of it, obscures it, makes it impossible to just willpower through it. Boy, there's so many things. I keep saying that.
Let me touch on that though.
Okay, okay.
That's really cool. Yeah, that's a really important piece, I think, of this model, is that so take any of those principles like service, open-mindedness, willingness, honesty. It's not as if those are something that one has to go out and get. That's what's actually there when you remove the things that are blocking it, right? So I
Exactly.
don't have to like, oh, I got to be honest. No, I just have to stop being dishonest. And what's left? Honesty. You know what I mean? So we are hardwired with it. It's just buried under layers and layers of programs and trauma, and you know, who knows what has happened to us or what we've done to ourselves, where our true integrous nature is out of reach, and therefore it's like inoperable. It's kind of like a car that you don't have the keys to. You've got a Maserati sitting there, and you're like, wow, you don't even know the Maserati's there until you clean all the shit off it. And then you realize like, wow, if I could just find the key to this, well, the key is just keep it really clean. And that's what you're left with. Right. So it's a process of subtraction, not addition. It's like being willing to surrender those things that are preventing me from being the completely integrous person that I actually am.
You got it. You got it. Because otherwise, then it's like a system of trying to Velcro these qualities, and they are just a, what do you call it? Like a caricature of the real thing. They're just
Right.
right. It's not the real thing, and it becomes all wrapped up in persona and back to identity and fake stuff that doesn't stand the test of time at all. I wanted to ask you about, because I've got a friend who's been going through recovery, and he will claim to not have a spiritual bone in his body. He doesn't believe in God. And it's been a little bit of a beef with him with the AA groups that he attends anyway, and they keep claiming that they're not religious, that they're exclusively not religious. But he's like, no, no, you guys, you know, I don't care. You call it God, you call it higher power, whatever you call it, you're still in this realm of religion. So, what would you say to somebody that really didn't have that belief? Could they still use the system in a
Oh,
successful
that's
way?
I love this one, man, because there's a beautiful chapter in the book. The book's called Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a big, thick blue book. Most people call it the big book. And the reason it's big is because when they printed it, they made the font really big, so they had a big, thick book, so they could sell it for enough money to keep themselves afloat. It's really funny. So they didn't want it to be a puny little book. But there's a chapter in there called "We Agnostics" that's really beautiful, and touches on that. And if I actually have one right there, but I won't bore you with reading it, but I can kind of boil it down from my own experience. If if there was a depiction of God in the 12 steps that was required in order to attain sobriety, I would be dead right now. I think perhaps the most wise and beautiful thing about the 12 steps, and this is just the wisdom of the co-founder, who again was just a drunk stockbroker. This guy wasn't a spiritual teacher. So you have to understand, it's like this guy was a loser. He knew nothing, and he wrote this book that's changed millions upon millions of lives. I mean, really like altered the trajectory of our culture in a very meaningful way. So I just find that fascinating. But at one point when they first started, it was much more religiously based. I think the first version of the step 3 was, turn your life over to God, become willing to turn your life over to God, whatever it was, right? And then someone, if it was him or someone around him, asked him, said, hey, we should soften the language around this, because we don't want to, we don't want to turn off people that are not interested in being religion, or the atheists or agnostics, right? So they did something that was so crucial. They put the term God as we understand him. And I think since they've, kind of changed it to God as we understand God, because people had a problem with God being a him. I mean, I don't think of God as gendered anyway myself. Like when I talk about God, I find myself saying, well, it does this thing or it does that thing, not he or she personally. But anyway, in the beginning, it said God as we understand him. I mean, if that doesn't open up the universe to you, I don't know what will, right? And so when I, checked into a treatment center, I was aware that there was, 12-step groups, and, I had a sense that's what the rehab was going to be based on. Someone really close in my life had gotten sober and they were in AA. So I kind of I had evidence that worked for someone. But if I would have checked in there and they're like, okay, you have to believe in Jesus Christ and turn your life over to him as your Lord and Savior, and we're going to baptize you tomorrow morning, I would have walked away. I would have been willing to die before I would do that. And I wasn't raised with any kind of spirituality or religion. I had a very secular, dysfunctional family. So I didn't even have like a bad Catholic priest that turned me off to religion or anything. It was just not on my radar. It was something that seemed so just out of the realm of reality or possibility for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I was able to access the help and receive the grace that I did solely because of that line, that it's God as I understand God. Okay, well, I don't know what God is or isn't, but there's something that makes my heart beat when I go to sleep every night. Like, I'm not doing that. What's doing that? I don't know. It can't really be explained. I've got these beautiful oak trees outside my office here, and they just keep growing. They get bigger and bigger. That branch is longer than it was 2 years ago right there. How? What is that, right? It's like you could go on and on. I mean, the evidence is everywhere that there's some sort of energy, life force, some intelligent design. There is a power, right? It takes the generation of power to do the things that I just described, and all the things we can observe just in the natural world. There's some sort of resource, there's some sort of energy that is giving life and creation and evolution. Like, things are moving. There's a inertia to, at least if you just look at all living things, there's something there that's alive and something that's making everything alive, right? So that, I think in the beginning, that was kind of my entry. And I used to think, in the very, very beginning, it would be like the ocean, it's like a power greater than myself. I mean, there's and infinite numbers of powers that are greater than just me on my own. So those two phrases, God as I understand him, and I just need to believe in a power greater than myself, which is, if you're sitting in a room with 15 other people that used to be where you were and now they're not, the collective field of all of those people is more powerful than me myself. So I can believe in that higher power in that church basement, right? I hear the stories people telling, oh shit, this one was worse than me. They were worse than me. I was a little worse than this guy. Doesn't really matter like what your, the severity of your experience with addiction or alcoholism, but there's a lot to be said for the will and the commitment of a group of people. And that will and that commitment is more powerful than me by myself. So
Yeah.
this is why, the 12 steps are so imbued with open-mindedness, right? It's open-mindedness is just antithetical to the rigid grandiosity and arrogance of the ego. The ego is like, there's no God, right? And in order to get over that, the being behind the ego, is invited to adopt enough humility to say, okay, there are some things in this world that are more powerful than I am. That's a power greater than myself. You're in. And to go a step further, one of the things I find so fascinating, and I've been trying to unpack this for 27 years of being sober, and I'm writing about this, a number of other things related to this in my book, but to me, this is just one of the most bizarre things about spirituality in general, about God and our relationship to God, about the 12 steps, about recovery, is that, and it says this in the Alcoholics Anonymous text as well, that when you pray, you don't have to believe in God for your prayers to God to take effect. Right. So my first prayer, day one in rehab, was like something to the effect of, God, I really want to be sober. I'm going to die and I want to live. Would you just take these cravings and this obsession away from me? Like, I just want to be free. Something like that. And I just kept saying it over and over and over again. I didn't believe in Jesus. I didn't believe in Buddha. I didn't believe in Krishna. I didn't believe in any God. And I didn't even know the God to whom I was praying. It was just, I didn't even have a concept of the ocean or nature or my heart beating or any of the things that I just mentioned, or a group, being a power greater than myself. I had nothing. I'm in there on my hands and knees, with my hands together, because I literally just saw people in movies pray like that. So I was like, well, I think that's how you pray. I didn't even know how to do it. I didn't know how to pray. And I just kind of pretended. I didn't believe in the God to whom I was praying. And from that very moment, on February 15th, 1997, until this moment right here, August, whatever, 2024, I have never, ever once had anything remotely close to a craving or a thought that I've entertained about taking one drink of alcohol or any drug whatsoever.
Amazing.
And and there's a lot of work that went into it, obviously, after that, but that initial prayer opened the door for me to then start to work on myself and heal some of the underlying issues that were making life so unbearable that I had to stay anesthetized 24/7. But yeah, I find that so interesting that you could pray to a God that you don't believe in and it still works. It's like, what? There's no like prerequisite, right? God isn't up there in the sky going, well, you have to like believe in me and then I'll hook it up. It's like God as consciousness is just waiting for me as an aspect of it to return to it with open arms, right? Like, I am part of consciousness. We're all part of consciousness. I mean, take the word God out and just call it consciousness. That's an easy fix right there, right? There's an awareness, there's an aliveness, there's a consciousness of which we are all a single focal point. And this consciousness in its generosity allows us to kind of splinter off into our own unique expressions and fucking kill ourselves if that's what we're inspired to do, right? With our free will. But the very moment we decide, wow, I'm kind of out in the dark here, consciousness, I would really like to kind of merge back with you here and get back in the fold. Consciousness says you're already here. You're the one that left. I don't believe in a punishing God or like that you have to be religious or any of that. Funnily enough, though, Beth, I recently, and this is just so weird, I was recently inspired for really the first time in my life to go check out a church, and I bought a Bible. It's just, I don't know. I can't explain it. I mean, I can kind of explain it, some of the ideas around it, but I mentioned to my wife, who's never been religious, her family's not religious. I said, you know what? I think that it would be helpful to me and maybe to us to kind of not to become religious, but to explore this Jesus teacher. And my wife is like, duh, that's my main teacher. And I'm like, you're not religious. She goes, I know. I'm talking about Jesus, not religion. I'm talking about the man, the teachings, the energy. And so
Beautiful.
we've been twice, and it was really, really lovely. I mean, I could go there every week, and I wouldn't say I'm a religious person, though. It's just like, there's something to this. But that took me, 27 years of sobriety before I even considered the idea like, oh, wow, maybe there's actually something in this religion that could be beneficial to me. And I think one of the things that motivated me to do so was it's kind of like this, principle, the enemy of my enemies is my friend. Meaning, when I look at the entities in the world at large that control vast swaths of humanity that I would perceive to be evil, and which I would define as just the absence of love, uh, they all seem to really hate Jesus. you know? I mean, they really don't like Christians. They do not like this Jesus character. They want to stamp it out. It's very obvious. And I've never paid much attention to that because I've never identified as a Christian. And, Jesus to me is just one of the many avatars that's come to earth. And there have been quite a few of them that had some great things to say and great things to teach. So it's not something I ever really had my finger on the pulse of, but I've kind of been looking at that like, if all of these people that seem to be overtaken by a demonic dark energy that are so out in the open now, since, I mean, for a long time for me, but I think a lot of people since 2020,
Mhm.
if they're all against that direction, I think I should go in that direction, because I want to go in the exact opposite direction of wherever they are in the Luciferic, I mean, look at the DNC convention. I mean, it's like they got an abortion van out front. It's like, whoa, super, super weird people, man. They are off the path that I want to be on. So, one can come about, I guess, being more open to religion in so many different ways, but to your friend's, conundrum, it's not at all required to be a member of a 12-step group or to be sober to believe in any specific God or religion. I think that it's tough for some people because there are artifacts of Christianity and artifacts of the Bible inherent in the 12 steps.
Mhm.
And some of the prayers that are said in meetings and stuff, the Lord's Prayer and so on. I mean, yeah, it's a Christian prayer, right? So I could see how that would be off-putting, but there's so much gold there. I think if one can, really adhere to those two entry points, a God as we understand him and believing in a power greater than yourself. Like if one was to latch onto those two, that really opens everything up to where you can choose your own adventure and still, get the benefits of physical sobriety and all of the refinement to one's character that creates a life worth living.
Beautifully said. That's amazing. Yeah, I like how you started just about when you didn't even believe, right? And it's not belief isn't a requirement. I feel sad that they throw that word around so much and like you have to believe, you have to believe. It's like no, you don't have to believe. You have to experience. You have to be available, and you also have to have that tiny little bit of knowledge we're never given in any platform that I'm aware of, that God listens to everything that you say and responds to everything that you say. Now, it's you might be giving a lot of mixed signals, and God can be going like, okay, just let me know when you get it straight. You want it, you don't want it, you want it, you don't want it, whatever it is. um but yeah, it's your system, your body listens to you, God listens to you, everything is responding to you. We've just never been taught to put out a clear message or to check the motive of our messages. But you get to that place, like you said, you were, you had surrendered, like, I can't handle my life, I can't do this, and there is something that you can surrender to in that moment. So yeah, I just thought that would be nice for him possibly to
Yeah.
hear
Oh,
you
there's
talk
one
about.
thing I just came to me. There's a piece of text in the big book in that chapter I mentioned earlier, We Agnostics, where it says that, to paraphrase, you don't have to believe in God. You have to be willing to believe.
Mm,
I mean, that opens it up quite a bit. So
yeah,
maybe right now I'm like a hardcore atheist. I'm like, no way I can rationally explain the entire universe away. It's all science, whatever, right?
yeah.
Well, okay. Can you at least have a modicum of humility to
Mm,
even be willing to change your position, right? Just, you don't have to change it. You can believe what you believe, stay atheist, agnostic, whatever. But are you willing to believe that there is a higher power? Yeah. And then boom, the door's open. That's it. I mean, it's that simple.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
then, spirit's never going to cross our personal will, right? I mean, that's the gift we have. But God didn't create us that's like, haha, your life's going to suck unless you follow my dictate, right? It's like, cool, you're out there as a spirit that's embodied as a human, and you can go do whatever you want as long as you're willing to pay the consequences, of karma, not God punishing you, but just the natural consequence with sequence. What happens when you do A, B, and C is going to be D. And also to reap the rewards when you make higher choices, right? Just because that's the way the karmic thing is made out. So the God that I am relating to is not a God that controls me and makes me believe in it. It's like, hey, I'm here if you're willing to consider that there's something bigger and greater than you. Then you're back. There's the grace. That's it. I mean, it's so beautiful, and as I said, if it wasn't built that way, there is no way I could have done it. Absolutely
Mhm,
not.
mhm.
No
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
Even as desperate and hurt as I was at 26 years old, I mean, if you told me I had to adopt some sort of dogma or theology or go to church, I mean, there's no way. There's no way I could have done it.
Yeah.
Tell me to sit in a room full of a bunch of other fuck ups, it's like, all right, I can at least relate to those people. And I
Mhm,
think that's really one of the secret sauces of, the 12 steps to begin with, and why maybe religion and psychology had failed. If you're an alcoholic or an addict, you're like constitutionally incapable of um, listening to anyone that hasn't had your direct experience. No judge, police officer, parent, husband, wife, clergy, rabbi, shrink, psychologist, psychiatrist. They can tell you all day long why your problems are, around your addiction, your alcoholism, what to do about it, how to stop. You literally are like fundamentally incapable of listening to them because they don't understand. But you can sit down and talk to someone who's like, oh, yeah, I was a junkie for 20 years and now I'm sober 10 years. All of a sudden they have your attention because they know what it feels like. They know um, internally what that struggle feels like. And there's a certain credence that we'll give them because they've been in our shoes. And it's just impossible to listen to someone who's preaching at us or telling us what to do or being judgmental of us because they just don't understand. And I understand why. Like, if you've never been addicted to drugs in your life, you're just not prone to that kind of behavior. And you look at someone who's, say, a crack addict, and you like had a hidden camera and you're watching them in their room all day, just like hitting the pipe over and over again and just going crazier and crazier and getting scabs and, whatever. It's just like falling apart. you literally can't rationally understand why they keep doing it because you can't relate, right? You don't have that propensity. I can look at someone like I watch the show Intervention sometimes. I look at someone sitting in a room smoking crack. I know exactly why they keep doing it, exactly why they can't stop, why they don't stop. I could talk to that person from a place that someone who hasn't had that experience could never talk to them because they have not lived it. And so it's like if you're caught in addiction and someone on the outside who's not an addict says, "Why don't you stop?" I mean, that sounds totally insane to an addict. That's like telling someone who is starving to death to not take a bite of food, or someone who's about to die of heat stroke and hydration, tell them don't drink a glass of water. I mean, it's like there's those analogies don't barely even fit. But that's what it's like. You feel like you're going to die if you don't get the next whatever that next is, right? And there's a way that someone who's been there can communicate that and get the attention of an alcoholic because they're able to circumvent the defenses of the ego that say, you don't understand, you've never felt like I feel. So if I say, yeah, I know exactly how you feel, I'll describe it for you. And they're like, holy shit, you know. All right, what else have you got to say? And then that opens the door to possibly help them.
Exactly. Yeah, you have the credibility. You've been there. You've walked in their shoes and can guide them as a result. Yeah, I firmly adhere to that as well. I wanted to talk about the pleasure aspect of addiction that I know is probably, I don't know how you feel about that, if it's, relatively small, but pleasure itself is an addiction, whether that comes through the hit on the pipe or through sex or whatever means in life, how, that becomes a really, I want to say recyclable commodity that doesn't keep on giving, right? The more pleasures that you consume, the more diminished their effects become in the process. And then so that hedonist archetype, as you already know from talking to me, the archetypes all have their unconscious expression, they have their awakened expression, and there very much is an awakened hedonist that I'm on a mission to reclaim hedonism, that it's not all a bad path by any means, but it has that very, very dark abyss driven by emptiness. The more emptiness drives you, the more empty you get, the more you fill yourself up, the more a bottomless pit you are. And so how has your relationship with pleasure changed over your recovery?
It's a great question. And I'll preface just by saying, for anyone who's an addict or alcoholic or anyone who's able to enjoy drugs and alcohol recreationally, I've never been and never will be anyone that thinks there's a right and wrong to what you put in your body and how you choose to alter your consciousness. I mean, if I'm totally honest, I used to really love smoking weed, and I don't know that I would still love it. I have a feeling I probably wouldn't, based on a couple of CBD experiences I've had that were definitely not fun. Um, but I don't know, say I did like it. If it was something I could do once a month and, take a couple little hits off a joint and kind of relax, meditate, watch some TV, get the munchies, I don't know, I might do it, right? I don't want to take that chance. So I'm not against anything. And whatever people do for pleasure is their own business, and I empower everyone to do that. Um, it's to me about a cost to benefit ratio. So there are things in my life right now, for example, like this thing right here, which is a nicotine lozenge. Um, it's called Lucy, by the way. I quite like them.
You want to hold it up again? I was just thinking, yeah. Is it an alternative thing?
Yeah, I mean, I smoke cigarettes. I quit smoking cigarettes, I don't know, 20 years ago or something.
Okay.
And then I was nicotine free for a number of years. And then I started getting into just, brain optimization and flow states and things like that. And I read some studies how nicotine's great for focus, it gives you a little dopamine, et cetera. So I started using nicotine just in very small doses as a nootropic. And then quickly found that I had habituated to it. And now, if I'm really honest, I would say, if by my definition of addiction, I'm addicted to nicotine. Okay. However, the consequences of the pleasure that I derive from it are much lower than the pleasure. Now, there's a part of me, and this is the internal struggle I've had. There's a part of me, which I think is a healthy part, that wants to be free of all habits, addictions, compulsions. Like, I don't want to need anything outside of myself to have a sense of ease in my body or to achieve a sense of comfort or pleasure, as you said, right? So there's a kind of an intellectual understanding that's like, oh man, I'm failing because of that. Like it's a sense of, shame, not a deep level of shame, but if I could snap my fingers right now and like have nicotine completely gone from my life, if I'm honest, I would do that. And I've tried to quit a couple times and given it a real college try, and I was very irritable for like 2 months the last time I tried. I'm like, okay, wow, I'm going to have to just humble myself and accept that for whatever reason, maybe it'll be revealed someday. I just feel a lot better when I have the nicotine around all the time. So there's kind of a spiritual pride element or maybe spiritual perfectionism within me that says like, you're not really sober unless you don't use anything mind altering. Now, I don't get high from nicotine, but perks up my mind a little bit, helps me be focused, whatever, kind of changes my mood, changes my state in subtle ways. But it's not causing me to have difficulties in my marriage. It's not financially damaging to me. It's not, at least in any meaningful way, damaging to my health, that I can tell. So I can't really find a downside to it that would motivate me to stop based on the pleasure that I derive from it or the pleasure that I perceive to derive from it. A lot of it's probably just mental, to be honest. So that would be an example, like a real-time example of something in my life right now. Take another substance, caffeine. I love the taste of coffee, but I've noticed over the years I've gotten pretty sensitive to caffeine. I'm able to completely control whether I drink caffeine or not. If it's a day where I feel like, oh, I might, have potentially stressful work to do, or I really have to, be in a relaxed state, I won't drink coffee. I can choose whether or not I say yes or no to it, right? So I derive a lot of pleasure from coffee
Mhm.
sometimes. And there are times when I drink some and I go, that was kind of a bad idea. Let me take note of that. And then, in the days following, I might take a pause. So I think pleasure is a really important part of life. It's just that my own, kind of my own barometer of what I do to seek comfort and to seek pleasure is based on whether or not it has consequences and whether or not those consequences are worth the pleasure that I'm getting out of them. So it's not a rigid black and white, like this is good, that's bad, I say yes to this, no to that. It's an ongoing relationship with anything I'm doing. That might be like, I hate working out, right? But I'm 53 and I feel a lot better when I work out. So I work out kind of half-assed 2 or 3 days a week, and I don't derive pleasure from that whatsoever. I'm just not one of those people that like, oh yeah, got a good workout in. I hate it. I just straight up, it's so annoying. Um, but I'll do it because of the pleasure that I feel. Like I go, oh my God, I should do this every day. I'm in the best mood. It totally nukes any, weird waves of kind of depression or anxiety that might be percolating in the background. I mean, it's just so good for me mentally and emotionally. But because of the difficulty that I find in doing it, I do it much less than probably is even healthy. I could probably use to do it even more. Right. So for me, it's like giving myself grace, having patience with myself, um, not holding myself to any standards that are setting me up for failure and so on. But a life without any pleasure, man, without chocolate or some ice cream or sex, or in my case, nicotine or the occasional cup of coffee. I mean, it's like, dude, that's not a life I want to live. I want to live free. I want to be able to be free. The only real boundaries I have in terms of pleasure is I'm not going to do anything in my life that harms other people, regardless of what that is.
Nice.
And there are certain substances with which I just have a very firm boundary. I don't care if I would get some pleasure out of a glass of wine, for example. Sometimes I'll see someone drinking some nice red wine. I go, oh man, I wonder what that would be like. But if it goes the way it used to go, I don't care how much pleasure I'm going to get out of a glass of wine. If I end up, under a bridge somewhere trying to buy heroin, then that was definitely not worth the pleasure I got out of having a glass of wine at dinner, and so on. So there are a lot of things in life that are pleasurable that I just choose to just have a hard line against because of the known consequences. Pornography would be another one. I mean, it's just like, it's not a moral thing. I mean, it kind of is, but not so much for me. It's just like the effect that it has on my consciousness is so toxic. I mean, it's just like, it really, really is very harmful for me. But it took me to arriving at a certain, I don't know, level of self-awareness and mental and emotional health to even realize how toxic it was for me, which was a number of years ago. I mean, I think it's something I became aware of incrementally over time. But that's, to me, pornography is very pleasurable. But oh my God, like it is like a porthole into the gates of hell, like just emotionally. I don't care what kind of temptation it would be to me. There's just no way in hell I would ever go near that shit. Despite the fact that it can be very pleasurable and obviously very accessible in today's age. So yeah, I think it's all about relationship to me. It's relationship with different behaviors, different substances, what serves me, what doesn't. If there's something that doesn't serve me, as much as I think it does, like nicotine, then there's a willingness to like keep it on the table for examination, right? It's like, I'm not just going to, no, man, nicotine's awesome, I'm going to do it forever. I go, okay, I'm aware that like I'm nervous to leave the house if I don't have this thing in my pocket. Like I'm very aware of what it feels like to need something outside of myself to feel how I want to feel, and I don't like that. So, I'm very open to changing that, but at the same time, if I look at the big picture of my life, if that's like the one thing I'm doing that's like maybe not, I'm not in control of as much as I'd like to be, if that's the only thing I'm doing, I'm still doing pretty good.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Especially considering where I
Grounded.
came from. So, it's giving oneself some grace, but also self-honesty to acknowledge like, okay, I'm a little off the rails over here. I'm going to monitor that and, just remain aware and be willing to surrender it if it comes to a point where I feel I need to.
Nice. I love that. Uh, One of the ways that I reasoned it for myself and wrote about in that chapter was that, is it really pain? Pardon me. Is it actually really pleasure, or is it pain in disguise? Right. So if you go on a bender of some kind, or like you said, that all of a sudden you're doing the things you didn't want to do, and it so quickly turns dark, and it feeds depression, or it feeds anxiety, or it interferes in your relationship with your partner, with your friends, with your work, with anything, then is it actually pleasure anymore? Or you can eat a certain amount of chocolate. I can have like one or two pieces of chocolate every couple of months, and then I enjoy that like anything. But if I go over that, just with my caffeine sensitivity, then it ain't pleasure. It's gonna be mostly suffering, and I need to be honest with myself about that as a someone who's committed to a certain kind of hedonistic lifestyle, though it's not like what you think or anything like that. Like pornography to me is a pleasure killer. The small experience I've had with somebody who had been an addict, it's the saddest thing ever. Like they can't have normal pleasure anymore. And so that robbed them of all the pleasure they could have had. So yeah, it's a sad, sad, sad story. One of the things I wanted to talk about, boy, there's a lot still, is just the about, like, say, men and addiction compared to women and addiction. Do you see a difference in there? One of the reasons I'm asking is that I've just been really noticing in the work that I do that I consistently, even since my King Hero revelations and putting this work out and making myself available to work with men more so, even though I don't see myself as the leader of men, I really don't, but I'm a good alchemist, and I can help somebody get through a door and those kings often don't show up without some kind of a crash or breakdown, which addictions often bring about. And just noticing that it's always about 80% of the people in my trainings and my coaching and my courses are women, and then 20% are men. And they do have a harder time to make use of the work. That's no judgment. That's no, calling them that they have any deficiency of any kind. But I really want to understand that and see through your eyes in particular, if you have anything to share.
Yeah, it's funny. I've never really thought about that. And in my years of working with alcoholics and addicts, in terms of mentorship and so on, in that context, it was always with men, right? Because there's kind of boundaries put in place that are not enforced, but suggested, right? Things can get complicated if you're sober 10 years and a new girl shows up in the meeting and you're going to help her, what I mean? It can get problematic. So I was always, very mindful of that. But intuitively, I might say it's just more difficult for men to express themselves in terms of what's happening internally and emotionally. It's part of our wiring, I think, just naturally, even without culture. Male human beings are just going to express their inner struggle in a different way, maybe through physicality more so than talking, right? Men have a difficult time talking about their problems. I know myself, if I'm in a moment of stress, for example, the last thing that would be helpful is to talk about what I'm stressed out about. That would actually raise my estrogen, raise my cortisol, and get me more upset. Now, when I, observed my wife being in a female body, if she's upset, there is nothing that will soothe her more than talking about what she's upset about in that moment. Like right now, I'm pissed, I'm hurt, whatever it is, right? And we talk it through. I just let her talk. I hold space for her. She's very adept at accessing what it is that's troubling her and communicating it and articulating it in a way that's going to relieve it from her body. She's able to express it. I think that, gross generalization, but I think that most females are wired that way, like talking about a problem, airing it out, getting the feelings out, right? If they're pissed or they're sad, it's just like getting it out of the body, getting it out of the nervous system, whether that's stomping around on the ground and screaming or whatever it looks like. For men, it takes a bit more time and patience to get to those emotions, and they're relatively inaccessible in the heat of the moment because they sort of masquerade as other feelings, and it gets very confusing. It's like the prefrontal cortex of a male brain just kind of shuts down when there's a heightened state of emotions. And so it's like the fire has to kind of calm down so that you can see through the smoke, and then you can go back in retroactively and go, okay, yeah, earlier today when I was like flipping out about that thing, that was really stressed out, I was really pissed, I was really hurt, whatever it is. It's like there's like a time gap that's necessary to get clarity. And so I think in terms of addiction, the way, and again, I'm just theorizing here, I'm definitely not an expert on the topic, but I would guess that the way males and females find comfort and safety in drinking and using is going to differ based on how they experience pain and emotional turmoil or confusion or whatever it is they're going through, right? It's like, if a woman gets upset, it's pretty immediately available, versus a guy might get upset. We don't even know what we're upset about until 3 days from now. You know what I mean? It's like, we're just like, I don't know. I'm just agitated. We have to really do some deep digging to get to that, let alone to be able to process it, right? We just know, I'm just pissed, I'm stressed. And so I think in terms of, how we use drugs and alcohol to self-soothe and to medicate ourselves is probably like a very different application. And so when it comes to getting sober and working through some of those addiction issues, there's a different learning curve where we learn how to process our inner conflict in a healthy way. And it's going to be a different process for women than it is men. Men, we don't have the same kind of immediate access to be able to drudge those things up and put them on the table and deal with them. It requires kind of it needs a cool head, right? You have to be able to be out of your emotions enough to put those issues on the table and to be able to logically analyze them and explore them, and then be able to process them once we've made sense of them. It's like we have to find the meaning in the turmoil, examine it, then use logic to sort of go back in and internalize and process it, where it's not just like we throw this big mess of emotions on the table and like let's just process it and get it out of the way. It's like, whoa, no, it doesn't make any sense yet. We have to kind of compartmentalize it, clean it up, tidy it up, put it in a package, and then we can start to actually, disseminate the contents of the package based on that. I mean, that's my own subjective experience, of just if I go through a difficult time in life now, which of course happens. Thankfully, it never gets to the point where I think, oh, you know what, a whiskey would probably fix this. But I know when I'm like in the thick of it, going in the other room and like talking to my wife about my feelings is not going to be, I don't know why my camera keeps going totally blurry.
It fixes itself. It's like are you on an iPad, by the way?
No, I'm on like the most expensive webcam you can get with like a
Oh,
brand new iPad computer. It's just like, I
right.
just go back to the crappy the Apple native camera. But if I'm really upset, for example, say I was so upset that I was, getting close to the point where I think, a whiskey might make it better. Um, it still wouldn't be productive for me to start talking about the thing I'm upset about while I'm still upset. I would still need a little bit of distance, and then I can start to unpack it and kind of make that problem that's bothering me right sized, because it gets so overwhelming. It's like a propensity of the male brain to just like, I don't know if it's the blood flow or what's happening, but when a guy's really upset, like we can't communicate, we can't make sense of anything. I mean, think about any guy listening. If you've ever been in a blowout with your significant other and they're super emotional and pissed off and you get triggered and you get emotional, can you like go back to being rational and start making sense and be diplomatic and solution oriented? No. You probably have to walk away until you calm the fuck down, and then you can come back. Okay, you know what? I see your point. I was wrong here and there, and if next time you wouldn't mind doing this for me, it would help us. It's like you can't get to the solution because your brain is literally mashed potatoes when you're in the thick of the emotions. And so I'm guessing there's a correlation between how we process difficulty in sobriety, whether you're housed in a male or female brain.
Yeah, I'm really personally very committed to cracking the code of this because I feel a strong call to make this work more available to men. And it's interesting how you say like try to make sense of the emotional world first before you go back and process, as you say. And but the unconscious makes no sense at all. That's its hallmark, right? That's how you know you're dealing in the unconscious, because there's no sense, there's no logic. So there's some kind of a gap, but where there's a gap, there's a bridge. So I'm on a mission right now, having conversations with people that have a lot more experience working with men than I do, and they're in the male experience. So yeah, if you I don't know if you would have the time for an off-air conversation about this as well, then
Sure,
be
sure.
amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I've been one for 43 or wait, no, 53 years. I always
Right.
always forget how old I am.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
53 years.
But I find that stuff really interesting. There's a book I read many years ago called Why Men Don't Listen and Why Women Can't Read Maps. I think it's Barbara and Alan Pease. They were an Australian couple that kind of made this sort of lighthearted book just about different scientific data that explores the differences in how men and women think, brain function, hormones, neurotransmitters, just how we process emotions and things like that, and why just really interesting stuff. I don't know. I read that book probably, God, almost 25 years ago, and for some reason it just resonated with me, and I still use many of the kind of the examples or lessons from that book. Like one, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but to what we were just talking about, they were citing one study where it said, the average female speaks, whatever, the numbers are going to be wrong, but say 10,000 words a day. And the average man speaks 2,000 words a day. And it's just how we're wired, right? And that explains why when the husband comes home from work, this is again, just like totally generic example, but the husband comes home from work and wife says, how was your day? It's like, it was all right. Well, what happened? Did you get the raise? Oh, no. We're going to talk about it next month. Well, what did he say? And the guy literally has nothing to say. And the female might perceive that as like, oh, he's not communicative. He doesn't care about me. He won't open up to me. He's emotionally, checked out, whatever it is. It's like, literally, that's all the guy needed to say. There's no more detail available. The guy would have to have that awareness that, oh, I could really be of service to my woman here. I don't feel the need to explain it in any greater detail, but it would be helpful for her if I were to, go the extra mile and add some detail. But he's already used up his 2,000 words at work that day, right?
Right.
Take the other example. Wife gets home and, she's got 10,000 words allotted that day. She only used up 5 at work. And she comes home and she's like, okay, then so remember that girl, Jenny? Yeah. Well, I used to like her, but I like her now. She dyed her hair. It's brown now. Well, anyway, at lunch, we went to coffee and I ordered that one coffee I really like. And then we sat over at this table in the corner. And then I looked down and, it's just like on and on with this minutia of detail. Right.
Yeah.
And if the male doesn't have the awareness that the female brain is wired to remember all of that detail through evolution. It was really important. We were hunter-gatherers, that she's tracking everything, So a guy might have the response of like, God, she just talks so much. Like she just goes on and on. Like, dude, get to the point. So that book was so helpful. I never feel like, oh, get to the point when my wife's telling me all of this, what to me would be somewhat irrelevant detail about a story or one of her experiences. I'm like, I want to love her as well as I possibly can. So I'll be like, tell me more. Like, is there anything else? I want to hear all of it because I know that's going to be in service of her well-being. And she's grown to understand. If she's like, what happened with the thing? And I'm like, oh, it's fine. Don't worry about it. She's like, oh, okay. That's like as much detail as he's sort of naturally prone to give me. And then she knows she's going to have to ask for more detail. And I know that if that's important to her, that I'm willing to give it, but I'm not going to come home and give her 5,000 more words whenever to use them all up, So there's so much stuff like that, which I think is just, it's interesting. And again, going back to application, like to just have a basic understanding of some of those things just makes us relate in such a more fulfilling way. To understand one another. I'm just, I guess, a type of person. I really like to know what makes people tick, very much like you. I think you share that too, so those are some of the things that have been really helpful to me.
I love that. Yeah, it's so good. My son has been teaching me, and there were times where I was like, I wonder what he's thinking. I wonder what he's going through. And then sometimes I'd be brave enough to just ask the question. He's like, Mom, nothing. When you wonder what I'm thinking, nothing. There's nothing going on,
Right.
And I finally became totally at peace. And because I'll ask him, how was your day? Fine. You just get the one word answer. And it's exactly, I have to ask much more detailed questions and like, what was happening in math today or in shop mechanics or if it's in school kind of thing. And he will cough up a little bit more, but yeah, it's just not, it's fun to travel with him because we do try to make conversation. For some reason, he doesn't want to listen to music when we're traveling. He's not that into the same podcast as me. So we chat and we find ways to be in conversation. And, he's working to come up with words because it is, it's still pleasurable to exchange and share and be together in that way rather than, just in silence. So
Totally.
Yeah. It's really fun.
It's funny. Like I'm sure many people have witnessed this. Like if you're, I don't know, in a group sharing context or group therapy or talking to a therapist and you ask a guy, well, how do you feel right now? They'll be like, I'm good. And then the therapist like, good's not a feeling. I don't know. I'm all right. It's like, we can't even get to the nuance of, our emotional state. I mean, it really
Yeah.
takes some effort and some training on our behalf to be able to just, at will go, oh, I feel a little bit apprehensive right now. Like, feelings are so nuanced. I'm not anxious. I'm not scared. I'm not feeling fear. I'm just tentative, you know,
Yeah.
apprehensive, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't, we aren't going to naturally develop the language around our inner experience unless we're, inspired to learn to do so.
Right, right, exactly. There's a good sign at the farm where I work. The fellow who lives there, he says, the sign says, "Men have feelings too. We feel hungry."
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
It's
There you
so
go.
cute.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I have seen men make good use of the work of deprogramming, and I'm about to run my sixth training on the Journey Code coaching certification, and we're three quarters full of women. Right, it's all women participants so far, and I was thinking, okay, do I jump up and down and call out the kings and like come on down and so that's why I'm having these conversations and just feeling it out myself that what are the messages, and some people have said maybe you just haven't reached them in terms of like what they need to hear about the path, and it is so different in the short time since I've been having some conversations with men. It is really a night and day kind of experience, but I feel somehow that this is still a path for them. Anyway, we'll go.
Well, something
Yeah.
else just came to
Okay.
mind with that. Again, just being a guy might have some insights.
Mhm.
I think there's two influential factors at play in terms of doing inner work for men. For me, it was like a do or die thing, right? It's not like, oh, I was inspired to, find Beth Martins and like learn about her model and get some coaching. Like I was just literally, I'm going to physically die unless I do something. And that started my path. And then I realized, okay, wow, I'm not dead, but I could go back to the place where I'm going to die if I don't stay on this path. And that was, for many years, it was kind of an avoidance of pain versus a pursuit of comfort, right? And now I just want to feel more comfortable, so I keep doing the work. But if someone's not like kind of painted into a corner like that, a guy specifically, I think that guys are inherently motivated by and fulfilled by accomplishing things in the external world, right? Like I just found myself lately, I'm really into gardening. I mean, I haven't learned how to grow food yet, but I just want to make my yard aesthetically pleasing to me. I want to walk outside and go, oh, look, that cactus looks perfect right there. So I've been really into that. That brings me so much pleasure. I don't even want to work anymore. I just want to go play around in my yard and get my hands in the dirt. And I bought a pickaxe. I'm like learning how to break up Texas ground. And I feel so accomplished when I go out in the yard that I might derive more pleasure from that than like, hey, you know what? I really want to explore what's going on in my subconscious and how much that's driving me to make, poor decisions in life, right? So you have kind of this internal sense of satisfaction that a male gets from being proactive and building something, right? We like to build things in the world, bridges, companies, whatever. We're just like, we want to create and build. And then you have the societal programming that puts value on males based on what they can produce and build in the world. There's not a lot of accolades to a man who's doing a lot of inner work, right? It's not like on LinkedIn, you're like, I'm certified in, these 10 modalities of awakening. It's like I was CEO of this and I invented this and founder of this kind of thing, right? Not to say that doesn't happen. It happens across both genders, but I think those are like two factors fundamentally that probably make it more difficult to enroll men into doing inner work. And the men that I know in my life that have really done some deep work and experienced profound change as a result, I would say off the top of my head, all of them are people like me that only did so because they had no other choice. Maybe that's not true. I know a couple, actually, I do know a couple guys, and this is true of people I interview on my podcast too. I mean, most men that I know have a pain to purpose story. Every once in a while, there's kind of an outlier that was functional, successful, happy, and just thought, you know what, I'm going to, pursue a spiritual life or work on myself, or, the inner growth, personal development, and so on. But I noticed too, like you in my work, I don't do coaching and things like that, but just looking at the demographics of people who enjoy my content, things I do in the world, it definitely skews female also, which has always been weird to me, because when I started in 2016 doing what I do, because I had only personally kind of mentored and coached men, I almost called my podcast like the men's blah, 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 or whatever. I just assumed like I couldn't talk to women. I got nothing for them. Have my experience at that time was helping men. And then, for whatever reason, I just started doing it for everyone. And yeah, definitely more women resonate with my work too. And I think it's having something to do with that. It's just, the inspiration for men to work on themselves internally it's a little harder to get to. It's not so innate, unless they're driven to do so, or unless they're just fundamentally wired with kind of an existential curiosity for truth and understanding, or if they're, they enjoy the kind of intellectual stimulation that comes from understanding a model of the world, a model of life, culture, et cetera. I think of like a Jordan Peterson, or I don't think you like him, and it's not particularly on my listen list, but there's a demographic of men that are going to follow that because they see the inherent value in understanding kind of philosophical framework of what it means to be a human on Earth. And they might not be in any kind of pain or really, have their back against the wall, but there is like a demographic of men that want to work on themselves just because they're attracted to the refinement and the sophistication of understanding things, right? It's like educating themselves, maybe more so than, "Oh, I'm going to work on my childhood trauma," kind of thing, but just like, I want to, like stoicism would be a great example of that, right? A lot of men are attracted to that, I think, just because like they want to find a way to just make sense of the world. And there's a desire to understand that, but they might not be prone to go drink ayahuasca and like, deal with their inner demons or something that deep.
Right, right. Wow, that's really cool. And that's great to hear. I just noticed your message in the chat about your husband's interest, and yeah, we should definitely chat about that. And
There you go.
yeah, I know pace can be everything too. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah, really good. We have had some couples in the training before, and it worked nice. Even father, or not father, but mother's son, and might have another mother's son in this one. So
Beautiful.
yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah. Have you ever thought about coaching people about recovery? Have you ever had people that come to you and just based on your experience want your help?
It's interesting. When I started my podcast and kind of created my platform in 2016, I I was unknown, so I had no way to monetize it, to like pay for the production expenses, which at that time seemed like a lot. Now I spend much more because production value goes up and teams grow and things like that. But I was like, man, I'm paying out of pocket. I think it was like $3,000 a month just to run my thing. I was like paying to produce content for people.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was like, well, I'll do coaching. That's what everyone does. And I was very thoughtful. I created this 3-month program and
Hmm.
really put a lot into it and started marketing it on my podcast. And I took on one client and I gave him everything I had. I really did. I mean, everything in the kitchen sink. And at the end of the 3 months, we had kind of our review summary at the end. It's so funny. I love this story. At the end, I say, so hopefully you'll hear this someday because I love the guy. It was such a gift. I go, well, how you feeling? And, he was going through some career problems and relationship stuff and depression. He was just struggling. And I felt like I was the perfect guy to help him because I had experienced so many of the things that he was trying to work through. At the end of it, anyway, he goes, yeah, Luke, you know what? I think it was $5,000 for my 3-month program. At the end, he goes, you know what? I'll be honest with you, Luke. I said, yeah, please. How was it? And he said, well, I feel like I spent $5,000 and I haven't changed at all. That this did nothing for me. And I was just gutted. And it was so perplexing to me because I gave him my heart and soul and all the wisdom I had, earned by that time, which was a lot, especially in contrast to where he was in his life.
Mhm.
It wasn't like I shortchanged him. And more strangely, he was really good at taking direction. He did all the things I told him to do. He wasn't like, kind of a bogus client where you give them solutions and they don't apply them and they complain that they didn't work. Like, he literally would come back every time we met. It's like, yep, I did X, Y, and Z, still feeling shitty. And I'd be like, scratching my head, like, dude, what's going to get through to this guy? And so that was the end of my coaching program. I was like, yeah, this was not fun. I cannot take someone's money and not feel like they were benefited tenfold. It's just not how I roll. That wasn't the only reason. I just started doing other things. So that was the one and only coaching program I had. In terms of working with people in recovery, that's always been a little bit of a sticking point for me, because all of the life-saving care and love that I received from the men that came before me was all for free. It was just all service. And I think that I'd be quite skilled at helping certain people, but I've just never been able to get my head around charging people for that kind of help specifically. And not to discount anyone that does. I mean, there are sober living houses and there's professional sober coaches and treatment centers. I wouldn't be alive if there wasn't a treatment center that took my $10,000, so right. I don't have anything against people building economies around recovery. I don't know. It's like so many years working in recovery and sponsoring guys. It would be super weird for me to be like, cool, yeah, PayPal me and then we'll talk. It's just like, I don't know. It's just never something that just felt aligned for me. Yeah. But I'm not really officially a member of any groups. And so I'm also not doing it for free. I kind of transitioned into my ability to be of service to people in a more broad and less intimate way through conversations like this that I hope are helpful to people, and then I'm able to be of service to people. But my phone's not blowing up with 10 guys that are 30 days sober that are freaking out and just blew their life up or something like it used to be. And I got so much benefit out of that, but it was also at a certain point after a couple of decades, it also became kind of a limitation, because I would have a little wolf pack of guys for years, kind of a rotating door. And I won't say but the way that we practiced recovery was very successful. I had a really great track record of keeping guys under my wing, and God kept them sober because I told them to do or suggested they do whatever I did that worked, right? Then at a certain point, it's like, I kind of ended up the smartest guy in the room. And that became a limitation. I didn't want to be the guy that everyone's like, what do I do, Luke? What should we do? I don't want to be the leader. I'm just like you know what I mean? And when you help people, especially when they're in a vulnerable position like that, it's easy for them to sort of transpose some uniqueness or specialness onto you that I didn't want and that wasn't valid anyway, because I'm just like them. I just have a few more years doing what I've been doing, and they've been doing it fewer years. Therefore, I know a little more than them, But yeah, so at a certain point, I even phased out of doing it for free, because I just thought, I need to work on myself, and it's kind of holding me back to be the guy with all the answers. There are more answers to which, or more questions to which I want answers, and so it's been some time before I've actively worked with people in that regard. But I do really actually miss the beautiful reward of working with people more one-on-one in a more intimate, ongoing relationship, and just watching, God's handiwork manifest in their lives. I mean, that's a really special experience. I'm so honored to have seen so many guys for whom the lights turned on. I mean, I'm still in touch with many of them. Most of them live in California, and it's like they own companies, they're having kids, they're getting married. They're not only sober, they're thriving, and they're a net benefit to society. And I got to play a small role in participating in that transformation and that evolution, and so it's really something I actually quite miss. But yeah, to charge people money for that, it would be that would be a stretch. I have to find a way to reconcile that where I could feel like it was an integrous venture. Yeah.
Well, I could help you with that if you wanted.
Hey, I'm open. I
Yeah.
mean, right now, I guess, I'm writing my first book, as you mentioned earlier, and
Yes, please talk about your book.
that's kind of another broad stroke. And like, man, I hope to reach millions of people with my book and help
Mm.
inspire them to apply some of the things that I've learned in life that could be helpful to them. But it's just me sitting here on my computer writing the book. I don't get to see immediately the rewards of my efforts.
Yeah,
But
it's a time capsule.
it's
Yeah.
wild. Yeah, I have so much. I mean, I already had respect for great writers, many of whom I interview like you and many other people on my podcast. But wow, not using a ghostwriter, like not having, I have a writing coach that kind of just keeps me between, the rails, so to speak, which is very helpful. Otherwise, I would write 10 books and have to edit out 9 of them. But yeah, it's not for the faint at heart, man. Anyone that wants to write a book yourself, whoa, it's an intense process. So yeah, the book is called A Horse Named Lonesome, and I just signed with the publisher a couple months ago, and it's been something that's been
Congratulations.
brewing for a few years, and now it's, the clock's ticking. My deadline is April 25th, 2025, and the theme of the book is loneliness, and it's explored through the lens of kind of a narrative of my life experience. And so it's looking at some of the underlying causes of loneliness and the maladaptations that we apply to try to ease the suffering that it creates, and the ways in which those maladaptations further put us into separation, and ultimately how to find our way back to connection. Yeah, so it's deep work. It's a very healing process, because it's a very intimate, personal book, but it's also forcing me to explore things in my life that are pretty intense to explore in the way that I am. Yeah.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Like, if you need therapy, write a book because there's all
Right.
kinds of things that you think you've dealt with and that, oh yeah, this will be easy to write about and just share and then like I'm just a puddle. I'll go back and edit a little piece, or I was trying to do my audiobook and had to stop and cry a few times and it's just like, yeah, yeah, it's they don't say bleeding on the page for nothing, eh?
Yeah, it's intense. It can drudge up some pretty intense feelings and memories. But yeah, it's interesting, when you're working with your past and trauma and things like that. I find there have been, over the years, so many different layers to the processing, right? I mean, there's been so many junctures at which I felt complete in my resolution with the forgiveness of people that had harmed me, or forgiveness of myself for my transgressions, et cetera. And I feel like, okay, I can put that one to bed. Like, it's done, it's healed, the cake is baked. And then, I don't know, a new perspective emerges, which, as is quite prevalent in writing this book. A new perspective emerges, and I'm like, oh shit, I never looked at it from this angle. Dare I walk over there and look at it from the side? Oh, I got to do it, because once I'm aware there's another perspective with which to view it or explore it, then I'm compelled to do it. I can't not do it, or I'll feel like shit. I won't be able to live with myself. So yeah, there's been a lot of that where I'm like, why did I think of that one thing? Now I have to go into it to its core and uproot it. And so it's all good, but man, I definitely have to at times just take a pause and remember, like, there's no rush. I can take these things at a pace that will keep me in a state of homeostasis, and be able to actually produce the work without getting too caught up in the story itself.
Right, right. Well,
Yeah.
fantastic. I'm so excited to read it. It's a really important subject as far as I'm concerned. That,
Yeah.
so many people suffer with it, and it becomes an elephant in the room, let's say, that nobody is talking about, and we'll talk about relationships with everything but each other, and that the COVIDian era has been really brutal on that, very polarizing. A lot of families split up. I'm still in that situation, as you know, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, no, I'm really really excited for this work, and if you have the bandwidth to come back on and promote it when it's out, then please do so.
Thank you. I'll
Mm,
definitely take you up on that.
right on, right on. So two more topics. Do you feel like you still have the wind
Yeah.
for it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I
So
love it. I haven't done a podcast in quite a while because I've been, I've been archiving invites so that I can save them until my book comes out. But I wanted to do this obviously because you're awesome and
oh,
we talked about it. So yeah, I'm on fire. I have plenty to share.
that's amazing. So the psychedelics, I know that's something that you have explored, and so it's about, or it contains that altered consciousness element, and addiction also has that. And so, what is the line between addiction and, say, how would you call it, like journeying, self-discovery, personal growth that can come out of that, those two worlds? How do you see them?
It's such a fascinating intersection and one about which I am um, just so curious because of the paradoxical nature of the whole concept. Um, just for some context, I was sober 22 years before I ever worked with plant medicines or psychedelics. I mean, it wasn't even something that was talked about. It wasn't around. I mean, it wasn't like there were opportunities and I said, oh, no, I'm sober. It was just like in a completely different paradigm of reality to think about going and eating mushrooms or taking LSD or something. I mean, that's what I used to do when I was an addict. I mean, I did psychedelics constantly, to try to escape from being in my body because it was so terrorizing to be there. But I always used psychedelics before to attempt to escape, and they were so confronting that I always had to sort of modulate them with other drugs and alcohol because what psychedelics would bring up was too painful to feel and see. I didn't know that at the time, but looking back, there were moments where I almost pierced the veil and was like, oh, no, drink a bunch of beer. Like, we got to shut this down. I'm starting to see shit that I don't want to see. Like, the whole point of doing drugs for me was to not look at my childhood trauma or the shame that I held inside, any of the pain that I'd experienced in my life. I was trying to numb it. And I would do psychedelics and it would start to bring it up. And I'd be like, oh shit, no, 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 no. Better do some heroin and like put a wet blanket on this realization. But at 22 years, I started interviewing people on my podcast. Basically, I don't know. I would interview different people, and I started hearing about ayahuasca and different things like that in a very positive light. And it became clear to me that people were having experiences that were not of the variety of my past trying to escape. They were having experiences to actually go deeper into themselves in a healing capacity, which was a concept I'd literally never heard of. I mean, I didn't know about Ram Dass and people like that had used psychedelics for spiritual purposes. I was totally ignorant of that because it's just not part of my history. So I started meeting people for whom psychedelics had been incredibly transformative and healing, A. And then I started meeting people who were once addicts or alcoholics, like me, who had gotten sober using things like iboga and ayahuasca and mushrooms, which was totally not, I mean, counterintuitive is an understatement. It was like, what? I mean, it just made no sense. It's just like, I don't know, trying to explain the sky to a fish. It's just like, you can't even imagine how that's possible. Like, because my route of recovery and everyone that came before me that I was aware of is based on complete abstinence from all mind altering chemicals. And that's the only way I was able to get sober because I had tried to quit drinking before. I had tried to quit heroin. I tried to quit cocaine, and I could never do it because I was never willing to stop smoking weed. Because I would smoke weed, and then it would kind of activate that. It would wake up the dragon, and then I'd be like, well, I'm pretty stoned. It's getting kind of boring. I'll have a drink, and then I'd have a drink, and then I'd get tired, so I do some coke, and then I get a little too antsy, so I do heroin. It's just like just so like pathetically predictable. So my own experience had been, if you do any drug, you end up on all the drugs. And I had tested that for years, and it always proved to be true. So the idea of going off somewhere and doing drugs, and then that would make you stop doing drugs, was just completely insane to me. However, because I'm a curious person, and I really like to understand what makes people tick, I really started asking some probing questions to these people, and it became really intriguing to me, to the point where I started to understand it in a different light. And then I started getting invites from people. Hey, they're, you want to go to Costa Rica and go to ayahuasca retreat center and stuff. I was like, no, I'm sober, I can't do that. I said no. But there was just kind of something in the back of my mind. I don't know. I just had an intuitive feeling that it was something that would be helpful for me. And so I was doing an interview in New York City a few years ago. This would have been 2017, I think. I was interviewing a channel named Paul Selig. And I thought, you know what? And this is right when I had gotten a concrete invite to go to Costa Rica and sit with ayahuasca. I said, I'm going to ask Paul if he'll ask the guides, his guides. I mean, this guy writes books that are, I mean, so deep and so perfectly written. He doesn't edit them at all. It's just like whatever his guides say come out of his mouth, he writes it down. That's it. I mean, it's uncanny. And I'm not a person that's really into like channels and guides. It's not really my lane. That's never resonated with me. But he did, and we had a lovely conversation. And during the conversation, I built up the courage to ask him. I said, Paul, no pressure, but if it is appropriate, could you ask the guides if it would be safe and advantageous for me to go drink ayahuasca? And he took a pause. Then he asked his guides. The guides channeled back the answer to me that was something to the effect of, you would be totally safe in your sobriety to do so, and it could be beneficial, but you'll also be fine if you decline and don't do it. And I was like, green light, let's go. I don't know why. I trusted the guides. And so anyway, long story short, I
What a
went and
great
had
answer,
that.
by the way.
I went and had that experience for a week, and it just completely revolutionized my life.
Mm.
It was so beautiful, so difficult, so profound. And I think more than anything, it's tough to pick like the main, you know, bridge, so to speak, but it really set me free to kind of discard the attachment to the identity of being a sober person, which
Excellent.
is a really healthy identity if you've been an addict. So I'm not discounting that. Like, I'm sober 1 year. Fuck yeah. I'm sober 10 years. I'm sober. I'm in the program. I'm in recovery. Absolutely for it 100%.
Yeah.
But it was at the same time, after 22 years, somewhat restrictive, because an experience like that could have passed me by if I had been more dogmatic and trusted myself less. I trusted myself enough at that point to know what my intentions were. I wasn't using it as an excuse to like go and like get a free, you know what I mean? There was no like self denial manipulation. It was something within my soul that said, dude, you're supposed to do this. I know this sounds crazy, Luke, but you're supposed to be in Costa Rica drinking ayahuasca. It was an intuitive knowing. I trusted myself enough at that point to go do it. And really the most liberating thing about it was probably just that I realized then that I'm my own man, and that I can do whatever I want to do if I'm willing to pay the consequences. Right. But it's like, I remember when the ayahuasca was hitting me. I've told this story a million times, so forgive me if anyone's heard it a million times too. But right when that cup of ayahuasca hit me on the first night, I mean, it came on strong, son. It was, I mean, I've done a lot of psychedelics in my past. This was wild. I mean, it was so hardcore, but like amazing, beautiful. Like, I was just like, fuck yeah. I mean, you got to imagine, like, I'm a guy who was an addict since I'm 8, 9 years old till I'm 26. So I love altered states of consciousness, right? I mean, I feel home. The higher I am, the more I'm good. And then I learned how to live sober for 22 years with nothing. Yeah, except cigarettes at one point, some coffee, but like sugar, sex, but nothing, as strong as ayahuasca.
Yeah.
It hits me and I'm just elated. And then I realized, oh shit, I'm super high right now. And then I asked myself or God or whatever, am I still sober? I got kind of scared.
Mm.
Oh shit, what, like what have I done? I just crossed the Rubicon here. Like we're not in Kansas anymore. We're not even in the United States anymore, literally. Uh and immediately the answer came from wherever these answers come, and it said, Luke, you have never been more sober in your entire life than you are right now in this moment.
Wow.
And I got what that meant immediately, because going back to my earlier definition of sobriety, soundness of mind, being in truth of who and what you really are. So the intellect, the ego, the persona, all of those parts that are usually up front, kind of the person you see as me in the world, like those are all asleep on the mat. There's another me that is communing with God in the most profound way of my life times 100. That guy was completely sober and tapped in to unconditional love, to the field of love, to the presence of God, right? Like that's the spot. That said, I know now, because I'm in a body and I have a persona, I have a mind, I have an ego, all these things, I can't live there all the time. But it's a good benchmark to know, aha, this is real. This power exists. It loves me. It's there for me. It's just been waiting for me my entire life,
Mm.
And so the difference, to your question specifically, to me, is the intentionality behind why I'm using any substance. Maybe more importantly, the nature of that particular substance, right? So cocaine is great if you go to the dentist and get a tooth pulled. It doesn't have a lot of utility outside of that. Opiates, great if you break your leg. Doesn't really take you to a higher plane of consciousness or connect you with the divine.
Mm.
Alcohol, to me, opens up the door to spirits, but not the kind of spirits I want to commune with, right? So it's like every different molecule on the planet that affects one's consciousness that could get you what we might call intoxicated has a different sort of personality to it. It's colored in a different way that's going to interface with one's biology and psyche in a unique way. The substances I've used in my sobriety, in my recovery, which is, again, is going to sound insane to some people, have all been substances that I think are impossible to become addicted to, are all substances that temporarily elevate one's consciousness and take you into a place where deeper work can be done than is possible to do, on demand in your normal waking sober state, and have had little to no discernible negative effects on my life whatsoever, probably other than loss of sleep during some of those experiences. Pretty hard on the body, in some cases. I mean, there's definitely a price to pay for the benefits that come with psychedelics, right? I mean, I, you're pretty worn out after one of those experiences, and
Yeah.
but you're worn out after a workout too, right? So I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think that nature sort of created these compounds, whether they come from plants or come from a lab. I mean, nature made people, and people made laboratories, and laboratories make something like MDMA, for example, right? So there's a lot of battles in the medicine community about like if it comes from the earth or not. Like, where did it come from? Space? I mean, still, I would rather take something like a mushroom than I would a synthetic mushroom or something, right? But that said, all of these molecules kind of have their own personality, they have their own unique expression, and they have their own individual utility based on what one's intention is. And so it's not about, for me as a sober person, like, oh, alcohol bad, DMT good. They're
Mhm.
just different tools for different purposes. And I don't have a need for the tool of alcohol because what it does is not of use to me. I wouldn't say I have a need for DMT, but what DMT has done for me in the past, for example, is something that alcohol could never do. And something that, I won't say I could never do it on my own, but it might take a few lifetimes, you know, to 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 be the experiencer of that clear of a channel for a short period of time. Is It's not impossible. I mean, many people do it through meditation and other spiritual practices. I did everything I could for 22 years. I mean, I worked really hard, and I never was able to achieve the levels of healing or understanding that I have been in certain circumstances with plant medicines or psychedelics. That said, I am also terrified of psychedelics. When I think about tripping at any moment on any day, it scares the living shit out of me, you know,
How come?
because it's because I know what's possible when I go there. I know that what I might be faced with could be extremely challenging. And it's not even that I'm terrified, it's the ego that's terrified.
Sure.
I'm not. My soul is like, fuck yeah, let's do 5-MeO DMT every day. I'm down. But the body, the persona, the mind, the intellect, the ego, all of the parts that like have to keep a construct together in order to stay here on the planet and be alive in the body, they're all saying no, 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 because they lose control of the shop. It's like, say the ego is the manager of your little retail shop, and the manager knows if you go outside and take a hit off this DMT pipe that he gets put to sleep instantly and the shop's going to be rearranged when he comes back in, and he knows that. So he said, no, 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 don't take a break. Don't take a smoke break. Don't go out there. Bad idea. You could get killed out there in the alley. Better just stay here where it's safe. But the thing is, I think that's beautiful. And I'm so grateful that I have that healthy reverence and respect for those states of consciousness, for those substances. I'm glad that I have that kind of reservation because I would be doing it all the time. I love altered states of consciousness. I mean, I don't care how far out you take me, I will hang on to that roller coaster, do or die. And that's a great quality to have because it's enabled me to do some really deep, gnarly, gnarly shadow work. I mean, in the
Right.
depths of the darkest shit in my life, and just go right into the core of it and just bask in it. Yet, because I'm kind of extreme in that way, it's really good that I have that rational concern for my safety, you know?
Yeah, it's called respect, right?
Yeah,
To have
yeah, yeah,
respect because
exactly.
you're dealing with, just a quick metaphor, it's firecrackers, and if you point that
Yeah,
thing in the wrong direction, or you do it without proper preparation, or you don't look at what your surroundings are and what you're going to set on fire in the process, or
100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that said, for anyone listening that's in recovery, that's kind of like psi curious,
mhm,
um, this is not something I recommend to other people. It's not something I
right,
suggest.
right,
Literally, it's just my own experience. And I have arrived at a place where I feel it's necessary to be honest about my experience. It would be disingenuous to say like, "Oh, I tried that and it wasn't good for me," or I mean, literally, many of the good things in my life today are a result of the clearing that's taken place in those experiences. I mean, my relationship, there's no way I could have the level of healthy intimacy and unconditional love that I have with my wife
mm,
if I hadn't cleared away the wounding that was preventing me from having that experience. And there were certain things in my psyche and subconscious wounds, artifacts of those wounds that I could not get to. I just couldn't. I went to every kind of therapy, every type of meditation, Kundalini yoga for years. every 12-step group on the planet. I mean, I wasn't someone that's like, oh no, I'm okay, I'll just like rest on my laurels. I'm not that guy. I'm going to go until I'm fucking fixed, you know, or at
Hmm.
least as close as I can get to it. And there were just things I could not heal until I went down that path. Now that said, the first couple years I was like getting so much benefit out of those experiences, and I was just like hyperspace speed through my own evolution and healing. And then, over time, over the past however many years it's been, I've slowed down a lot. Now it's like I have much more of a healthy respect. Not that I was ever disrespectful. I never had any negative experiences, but I'm not overzealous about it at this point. It's got to be like a very clear calling,
Hmm.
not just like, I don't know, this could be interesting. I'll go check it out this weekend. It's got to be like, oh no, I gotta be there. I'm supposed to be there. And I've gotten better about, again, to the sober people out there, I've gotten much more skilled in the past few years since I've been on this leg of the journey at discerning whether or not I'm just curious about an experience that's availed itself to me and it's just kind of intriguing and interesting, versus, okay, this person called me, they offered this said experience, and I just know in my bones that it is part of my dharma to be there, and I'm going to be there hell or high water. Like there's a massive schism, what's the word? Chasm. I think that's the word. Between those two feelings, and I've gotten pretty good, not taking credit for it, but I have practiced that discernment to where now I've never found myself somewhere in an experience like that going, oh my God, why did I do this? This is horrible. It's always been the right time, exactly what I needed, with the people with whom I needed to have it, and so on. So all of the things you started to mention, set and setting, intentionality, having a plan, knowing where you're going to be, are you going to sleep, who else is going to be there, what happens if worst case scenario, medical safety, legality. There are a lot of things to consider, and I've always considered those. So even though I've had some challenging experiences because, it's just been physically exhausting, or I've had to emotionally go into some territory that was really disruptive, I've never had like a bad experience where, people got weird, or negativity, or entities, or any kind of funky shit like that. Because I've been very, very prudent about how I've chosen and when I've chosen to have those experiences. So if
Nice.
someone is sober, I would really, err on the side of caution, obviously.
Right, right. Oh, that's awesome. That's actually really got a lot of clarity in where you're coming from. I share that, and I sincerely doubt anyone could ever get addicted to those experiences because they're kind of mini hero's journey. You're going to go through it. You're going to meet yourself. You're going to see things. You were talking about that willingness to even believe in God, and then the willingness to see what you didn't see. To me, that is the quality that if people could add that and have that, just be able to open the window and be available to things that they hadn't seen. Because personally, I learn things, I see things I didn't see every single day. There's nothing. It is the most humbling part of the journey where you're like, you think at some point you're gonna be like, oh, done this and been there, and it's like, no. And that's the good part. I know that ayahuasca in particular kicked my butt several times, and I would come out, you know, like I'd been in a wrestling match and I didn't win, and all of that, can, always gained insight. And then I had one, it was my last one. I felt like I never needed to do it again. And I prepared and I prepared and I prepared and I prepared, and I just did a ton of inner work. I let go of any possible thing I thought could demonize me during that experience. And then I laughed through the entire thing. It was
Oh,
like a pure joy. I was so blessed for that. The guy
yeah.
beside me cried the entire time. We were laughing and crying, and finally at the end, it's like I just said, "Let it go already," and then he starts laughing finally, and yeah, I just literally never felt a call again. That I all the teachings that I needed from that I got, and maybe there will come a time, but it's like you, not just like, oh, I wonder, or that'd be a nice group to be part of.
Yeah.
No, no, it's got to be.
It's funny you say that. The last time I sat with ayahuasca is probably, I don't know, 4 months ago, something like that. And it was a rough night. For me, when those experiences are the hardest is when I'm not really feeling the effects, right? Like, I don't know. I've met people for whom when it gets really intense and there's visuals and they're like really in it, it's scary. For me, I want that to be as strong as humanly possible because I'm just wired that way.
Your comfort.
What's hard for me is when I do it and I don't feel anything. I get pissed and frustrated and then I just feel sick. So it was one of those nights I just felt really, really sick. At the end of the night, I said to my wife, I said, I need you to listen to me right now and don't let me, I'm going to say something to you and I want you to never, ever let me to forget it. She goes, okay, what? I said, I am never, ever, ever fucking drinking ayahuasca ever again under any circumstances. I am done.
Right.
Then the next day I drank some wachuma. I felt better. And I thought, oh, I started to unpack the lessons from that night. I was like, that's the craziest thing about ayahuasca specifically. It's like, she's such a trickster. It's like the only thing predictable about ayahuasca is that it is wildly unpredictable.
Yeah.
The only thing you can control about an ayahuasca journey is that it is completely out of your control. And any ounce of exertion you put into trying to manage or control the experience will destroy you. So yeah, I thought I was done, and I might be. No one's invited me back to another one where I'm like, oh, I don't know. I think that sounds right. I mean, chances are I'll probably drink ayahuasca again at some point in my life, but that one definitely got my attention and I was like, okay, so this is what happens. I've heard about this from other people. I just had never experienced it. Oh, it was so brutal. I'm like, what? It's amazing. It's always fun, but
Yeah.
but still, she still delivered me wisdom and teaching. And I think I had actually a really profound physical healing, because I had something happen to me that I've never experienced in my entire life that I didn't understand, just like got hot and sweaty and shaky and just shit got super weird. I thought I was dying. Like literally I almost had my wife call 911. I'm pretty sure I was going to die. I just breathed. She helped me through it. And then, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, it started to subside.
Hmm.
And I was like, what the hell was that? No visuals, no like, elves or aliens, it's just like no bells and whistles. And so one of the lessons out of that was so beautiful is around expectations, around me outlining what I think any given experience should be, having the audacity to think I know what something should be like in an experience like that or anything, trying to control it in any way. I mean, there were so many lessons in the subtext of just what would be to the person observing just a guy sitting there being super sick all night, and that's all that was to me until the next day. I was like, oh, okay, I see. And I'm like, damn, man, she really is sneaky. What a way to like learn the lessons that I learned. I wouldn't choose those ways to learn them. I would rather have a beautiful experience and then have those realizations. But if that's what it took, that's what it took. And interestingly, I was having for the past couple of years this vertigo kind of thing. I would just get like just kind of woozy and dizzy. No one could figure out what it was.
Hmm.
And I have not had it happen one time since that night.
Ah, there you go. There you go.
So,
Interesting.
maybe that's what I needed. I didn't need to like go into my childhood again or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
who knows? That
exactly.
medicine or consciousness or God or whatever. It's like, oh no, what you need is to like, we're going to purge your liver. I don't know, some crazy shit like that. It just fixed me.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
sharing that. All right, so we're down to the last topic here, and about 15 minutes on my time on this side. Hopefully,
cool.
we can cover it. And I'd like to geek out on podcasting a little bit and what that's been like for you to be in that role, because I share that role. And like one of the things is, how do you cope with so many different perspectives? I know that you have guests on that feel different about different things and have, could be even diametrically opposed. And so, how do you negotiate that?
Well, I think part of it for me is in the curation of guests, because everyone's hand selected, right? I mean, that's part of the secret sauce of my success, I think, is I have a pretty innate sense of people with whom I can have a really interesting, passionate, engaging conversation. And I know that that's only going to be possible if it's someone that I have an authentic interest in, whether they're talking about something that's purely physical and they're like an expert on the thyroid or whatever. Like, it has to be the most badass thyroid person. Or it might be, someone who's talking about consciousness and more meta perspectives on the nature of reality or something more esoteric like that. So that's the first thing, is like, I have to really be interested in them and their perspective. Otherwise it would just be kind of going through the motions, and it would, even if it wasn't small talk, that's how it would feel to me. And my passion for the interaction would be hollow,
Yeah.
But that being said, since I have a pretty diverse range of topics that I cover on my podcast, it's unrealistic to expect myself to agree with every single person's perspective on everything, right? I mean, there was something you said when you're on my show, I think, about Alex Jones or one of these people, like, oh, I think they're controlled opposition. It's like, I don't feel the need to try to correct you, or even, you know what I mean? It's like, unless I won't even push back on someone unless I feel like, I don't know, I don't like arguing. I'm not like, oh, debate. Like, debating is just two egos like jacking each other off. To me, it's retarded. So, but if I had something that I could really stand on, some bedrock, like, oh, you know what, actually, Beth, I've known Alex Jones, we went to school together, I've known him since I was 5, and this is our history, and I could go, you know what, in my opinion, you were mistaken on that, then I might, but it's not really in my nature. And also, I'm not nitpicky. It's like, is that person's perspective a net benefit to me and to the audience? Is it a 51% positive, right? Or not? And it's already going to be that if I've determined through my own intuition and researching a person that I want to have them on my podcast. You know what I mean? But there's people that come on all the time, and I definitely don't agree with everything they say. But because of the open-mindedness that I've been practicing, I also am willing to change my mind at will. It's always at the ready to go, hey, you know what? They just said something really interesting that doesn't ring true based on my belief system, whatever I'm holding, or an idea that I might be attached to. Let me consider that. And I might think about it in the moment, ask more leading questions about it, like, how did you arrive at that understanding? Or I might think about it afterward, like, I have thought about it afterward. I think, was it Alex Jones you said, or was it someone else?
Yeah,
I forget.
yeah, it was Alex.
Yeah, I was like, I remember thinking about that. Could he be? What? I wonder why she thinks that, or like, let me look for signs. Is there any evidence of that? And so on. Like, I spent a lot of time on it, but just as an example in real time involving you, um, I like that. I like to be challenged, and I like to have my curiosity piqued. But I'm definitely not someone who's going to like try and put someone on the spot and prove them wrong or be right or prove my point. I'll just sort of gloss over something if someone, like, here's an example. I don't believe in space or like the moon landings, NASA, SpaceX. Honestly, I wouldn't even say I believe it's all fake. I know it's all fake. I mean, just 100%. Okay.
Mhm. Fake and
And
good.
I'll have people on, and they're like, say somebody has like a biohacking thing or something. They're like, well, NASA used to use this for blah, blah, blah. Like, they already lost me. I'm not going to take the time to try and educate that person on the fraudulent nature of NASA as an organization, right? It's not my job. It's not the right platform or context in which to do that. So someone listening might know, wait, Luke always talks shit about NASA. He thinks it's fake. Why didn't he just like call that person on it? It's not the venue,
Mhm.
like, am I going to convince that person of my point of view right there in that podcast? No. Why even bring it up? If
Yeah,
they
and
think NASA's awesome, cool. Example of that, I had Dr. Peter McCullough on, who to many people is like a freedom fighter and a hero, and he came out against the pandemic and was a truth teller and put his career on the line. A lot of people see him like that. A lot of like hardcore truthers think he's controlled opposition and works for pharma, and he's like part of the cabal and all this. I don't know. I found the guy to be very friendly. He came over to my house and spent a few hours. Seemed very genuine, authentic, friendly. He's very smart, well-spoken, articulate. He was a great interview. That was my personal experience of the guy. During the conversation, a lot of what he talked about was based on his perspective of virology that I personally feel is completely fallacious. And then some people like trolled me afterward, like, he believes in viruses. Why didn't you call him on that? I'm like, dude, you think my dumbass is, and I'm not being self-deprecating, but honestly, I do not have the intellectual prowess or understanding of like terrain and, what's the other one? Germ theory. Like, I'm not that guy. Talk to Alec, or there's people that are much more studied at that. I just know based on the evidence that I'm aware of so far that I don't adhere to the same belief system that he does, right?
Mm-hmm.
You think I'm going to take a guy who's built his entire career, his financial security, his entire life based on a certain methodology of medicine, that some podcaster hippie dude in Austin, Texas is going to like convince him in 2 hours that he's wrong about everything he's ever believed in medicine? Like, A, I don't think anyone could do it, or they would have done it already. B, I definitely am not the guy equipped to do that. So I'm going to continue on with the conversation, and we're going to talk about things upon which we can agree, or I'm going to elicit information out of him that I don't yet know that I want to learn and I think could be advantageous to the people listening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
See what I mean?
For sure. Like one of the things that, say I had somebody on the other day and they started talking about law stuff and so I'm going to say it in a kind of judgmental way, but like the magic trust behind the birth certificate, which to me is totally debunked. And he's talking about it, and I know it's part of his platform, and I knew that in advance. It's not the whole thing, so he had a lot of really good things to share. But am I going to use that time? I invited him, right? He's a guest in my living room, practically. It's really your living room. And so am I going to attack my guest? I invited you to ambush you, or like that just seems to me to be a wrong thing. And I may not agree, and I may not nod my head when he says certain things or whatever. And I do hope my audience can read between the lines and maybe put things together and not be completely misled by one thing that somebody says. And I'm always like, do your own research, and don't even just because I had somebody on, don't take it, oh, Beth thinks they're good, so I'll go and spend $10,000 on their process or anything. It's just not like that. You can't be held accountable. But I'm still not going to attack and put somebody on the spot and try to have a win an argument with them or call them out when they're my guest. I will actually cancel the interview if I feel like I got to that point that I just simply don't agree with them. One example coming up. So Alec recently had Dr. Garrett Smith on. And I don't know if did you hear this one at all?
No, I haven't heard that one.
Okay, yeah. So it's really interesting. He's really out there, and he does unfortunately come up against every single thing that we think about natural health to be real. And I'm always intrigued by that, the contrarian.
Oh, was he talking about like how vitamin D and vitamin A are toxic and stuff? Yeah, I saw
Exactly.
that show description, but I haven't tuned in yet. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'd be curious to see what you think. And then so I knee jerk booked him for an interview. I reached out, met him, and next thing you know, we have a date. And then I'm spending the next 2 weeks mulling on all of this stuff, going like, darn, I don't know if I can even follow through with the interview anymore. That he does have some interesting things to say that I think are valuable, and the understanding of the relationship of bile in the body. That to me, I watched like twice, and I'm going to watch a third time. I really want to understand that. But yeah, so there's, I'm curious, what does podcasting satisfy in you?
It's funny. After 8.5 years, I asked myself that a lot.
Right.
It's a lot of work, at least the way I do it in
Yeah.
person and long form interviews, and have a whole crew and production crew and all the things. So it's not just, I think I know many people that haven't tried to like create a successful podcast, don't realize that it's a lot of work and it's difficult. I've coached a lot of people, not professionally, but just people that have asked my advice. Hey, I got this idea. I want to launch a podcast, and I give them my whole rundown. And I would say the number of people that follow through and make it past a year and keep going are very few. So when I hit up against that, I asked myself, like, why am I still doing it? Like, like I'll just find myself, I spend a whole day basically doing one interview, right? The person comes over, we have some tea. It's like a 5-hour thing. My whole day is shot, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I'll think like, like, do I do this 20 years? Like, how long do I do this? Is this my thing? I don't know. Honestly, I just can't find a good enough reason to stop doing it. And I don't have another thing to kind of replace it. It's like, well, I don't know. I'm writing a book now. If I enjoy that process, which I would say it depends how you contextualize enjoying something so far. But, if I find it to be fulfilling and the book's a big smash hit and they want to put out another book, maybe that's a thing that I do too. But this is kind of the lane I found myself in. So I do wonder, what do I get out of it other than just the primary way that I pay my bills and support my family and whatnot. But I think internally, some of the most rewarding things about it are the relationships that I get to create and to establish and cultivate as a result. Just people for whom I have the utmost respect and admiration. There's something interesting about the sort of social dynamic of doing podcasting, where if I was just a fan, for example, of like a Gabor Mate, someone whose work I really love, right? Fellow Canadian,
Mm.
great model of, addiction and recovery and trauma. Like, he's just a brilliant guy. We have differing views on certain issues for sure, which I don't care about. That's not what we're talking about. He knows my path that I've been on. He knows it very well. So someone like that, if I just like emailed his website and was like, hey, I'd love to tell you a bit about my life story and kind of get your feedback on my journey, he's not going to sit down with me and have that conversation. And even if he did, he's going to view me as like a fan or a follower, not as a peer, and that's perfectly fine. Because these relationships and the hierarchy of our culture is there for a reason, right? People are in different positions. I think everyone's equal as humans, but some people are more knowledgeable, some people have more power, more money, etc. It's just kind of the way society plays itself out. But if he comes over to my house and we sit down and have a cup of tea, chill in the backyard for a couple minutes, shoot the shit, have an in-depth, very intimate, real, authentic conversation for 2 or 3 hours. He hangs out afterward. We shoot the shit a bit more. We now have a relationship, and the kind of hierarchical nature of that relationship is different than it would be if I was just someone at his book signing, right? It's like we're kind of peers now, and we now have the opportunity to learn from one another and to help one another. So if, someone in his network is someone I wanted to reach, I'd be able to reach them because now I'm able to reach him and vice versa, right? So there's like a social and professional ecosystem that establishes itself doing what I do that is really cool. I mean, there's just, my wife might have like a physical symptom pop up and I'm like, oh, boom, I know just the doctor for that, right? And I can text them, be like, hey, what do you think about this? Boom. I get an answer, right? I don't have to like go sign up for their website and take their e-course and whatever. It's just the access to people, and also giving those people that access to me that I might be able to serve in some way. So I think the relationships are really one of the pieces of glue that hold it together and inspire me to keep doing it. And then it's also just my insatiable curiosity and desire to learn and to unlearn, right? I think both for me are equally valuable. Is there's things that I think I'm very certain about. I have an enlightening conversation with someone and I walk away going, shit, I think I was wrong. Either my story was wrong or there's more to the story. There's more nuance or context that I was unaware of. And so every time I think like, yeah, I don't know how long I can do this, I have another conversation and go, oh my God, what if I would have quit last week? I wouldn't have just sat and talked to this person. I go, all right, I'm going to do the next one. And I just kind of keep going. I don't know how long it will continue to be like that, but I think one thing that'll be helpful to me in terms of longevity is I'm in the process of trying to work out some funding to build a studio in my backyard. like build a little guest house and have an isolated studio that's not in my living room, which is the professional thing to do, and also be much easier on my wife, who is the subject of having our house completely taken over on a weekly basis by a number of people. And I think that will help a little bit of the separation, and make it not only easier for her, but easier for me, where there's like, it's an isolated environment where that work takes place, and there's more of a definitive start and stop to the experience, where it kind of, when it's in my home, it ends up being a little more immersive than I would like to, because it's just in my nature to hang out with people and shoot the shit, and I have no concept of time. So it ends up being kind of a cumbersome process when you do it every week, or at least if you have to record enough in advance to fill weekly spots, which is kind of what I do. I batch them out. I'll do a bunch for 3 months. I'll just go nuts and take a couple months off, and so on, so I think
Right on.
in terms of sustainability, it's good to have, a dedicated space in which you do that kind of work.
Yeah, exactly. I'm familiar. I haven't done in-person podcasts at all. They end up so clunky, and it's a whole production. People have no idea what goes into your operation, and even it being virtual is a big thing. But
Yeah.
I've done in person, like a lot of workshops and hosting clients, and it is a totally different thing than having a client that I see. When you say, "Oh, okay, we're coming up to the end. Oh, okay, we'll see you next time. Bye." Click, and you're done, right? Whereas when you say, "Oh, I think it's time to go," it could be another hour before they actually walk
Right.
out the door.
Totally.
Like, yeah. So it's
Totally. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it deserves that. In person has that. That's something that has sadly become a kind of luxury. But yeah, it's a beautiful thing that you offer. And maybe just one last question: what do you feel is your relationship with your audience? What is your role in their life?
Oh man. I mean, the foundation of that relationship is that I just love them,
Mm.
you know.
Right.
That's my Yeah, it's just the intention behind everything I do is just out of love for those people that I don't even know. I don't love them because they're my audience. They're just a audience, right? I'm sure they're the audience for many other people like me. But yeah, that's always kind of the cornerstone of the people that I choose to have on, what I talk to them about. The relationship is based on the fulfillment that I get from knowing that the things that are discussed in the episodes have the potential power to really transform their lives on many different levels, whether that be physical healing, emotional health, mental health, addictions, their spiritual expansion, their consciousness, all of that. So it's weird because it's like a one-way relationship, in the sense that people listening know me much more than I know them, especially because the nature of my show is very conversational, and I'm I'm sure talk about myself way too much. Just kind of, I don't know how to not do that. Uh, and some people don't like it and they leave, and I totally get it. It annoys me when podcast hosts do that too, but I don't know. Sometimes it's just, that's how you build rapport with someone in a conversation, right? You each kind of share about your own life. That's how you get to know each other. But as a result, people know, I mean, I meet people and they're like, "Oh, I remember when you were 5, this happened." I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "Yeah, you talked about your podcast." I have no memory of that. So it's an interesting kind of relationship, because there's only one of me and there are tens of thousands of them. They know a lot about me if they care to keep listening, and I know nothing about them until I happen to meet them somewhere someday in an event or something like that. So it's an interesting dynamic in terms of a relationship, because it's kind of one-sided. Um, but it's still fulfilling to me, because even, the 1 out of 1,000 people I ever end up kind of interacting with or something, or probably a smaller percentage than that, when they share the way that the podcast has impacted their life, which happens a lot on social media and emails, like the one I got today, for example. But in person, you look someone in the eyes and they're like, "Dude, I listened to this episode, this one, this one, this one. Then I did this, this, and this, and it's affected my life in the following ways. Thank you so much." I mean, that is like a really rewarding experience. And that's always the thing that really reminds me why I'm doing it. As I said, because I really love people, man. And I want people to be able to have the beautiful sort of transformations that I've been able to experience in my life. And I've had them because I do the things that people talk about, like the people that I'm talking to, right? I read a Gabor Mate book and I go, oh shit, wow, I just pieced something together from the way I was raised by my parents. Oh my God. And it changes my life, right? And I go, shit, if I could have a conversation with that guy and delve even deeper into that particular model or that topic, and other people listen to it and they do what I did with it, which is apply it to their own life, they could be set free like I was, So it's like, I feel like my role is the, I don't know, I don't want to say like pioneer, like I'm the only one that has the smarts or courage to do the pioneering, but it's like, I'm willing to kind of try all these different things out and just try things on and see what works for me at least. And then if I validate something, whether it's a philosophy or a practice of any kind, I go, okay, I've been doing this. Here's what I experienced, and I inspire some other people to do it. I mean, that's awesome. Because it's the funny thing is, the real like cosmic joke of it is that all the things I'm doing in my life toward my own betterment and, healing and expansion are all things I would literally be doing anyway, even if I worked at Target. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
I'm not like doing the stuff I do because I'm making a podcast about it. I'm doing what I do and I'm making a podcast about that. It's the stuff I've been doing for 27 years. I just figured out in 2016, I said, oh shit, you can like create content around what you're doing in your life that's helping you. And then other people can model that, or you can model that and other people can practice it and it can help them like it helped you. Winning.
Exactly.
And then when
Yeah.
I realized I could like make a living at it, it was like, oh, what? You got to be kidding me. This is
Yeah.
the shit I've been doing for free, or actually paying to do, right? Going to see therapists, healers, getting trained in this and that. And like, oh, wow. Now actually I get paid to do what I'd be doing anyway. And I get to, be a positive impact on the few people in the world that resonate with me and my message and the work I do. It's freaking awesome.
Amazing. Yeah, I feel like I'm talking in the mirror here. I share so much of that and really value
Cool.
the role. Absolutely love it. And sometimes I will get a little overwhelmed, book too many interviews, have too much in the back end to do all the time, and then I'll wane off, and it's like, yeah, I'm not going to talk to anybody this week, and maybe not next week either. And then there's some kind of mechanism gets going in me, and it's this like, oh, okay, I got this question. Who would I talk to about that? And then there's this person, and I'm a classic, connector archetype also. So I love the connecting the dots or just being able to reach somebody and and then it bridges that gap where you feel like there's some, oh, they're the good, the big smart person out there, and I'm just this little one over here. And all of a sudden, like you said, you're at the level of peers having a conversation, asking your questions, and everybody can get the benefit of that. So to me,
Totally.
it's like amazing.
Totally. Yeah. Another piece of it too, just with the audio format, a lot of the cataclysmic changes in my life came as a result of me listening to, this is back in the day before podcasts or MP3s, but I would listen to like these tape sets of different, and then it was CDs, right, of these spiritual teachers in my early recovery. And even I would listen to like recovery speaker tapes, just, I mean, thousands of hours. And because my head was so loud and so full of counterproductive thoughts and noise and just static, that I had to fill it with something. And I used to drive for a living when I lived in LA. I worked in the fashion industry, and it entailed just driving around for 12, 14, 16 hours a day, just driving around. And so I would just nonstop listen to people sharing wisdom. And I would literally just brainwash myself. I would fall asleep to them and keep them on while I was sleeping. So while I was going into theta and going into delta, I would be brainwashing myself with better ideas than the ones I had. And so I think part of the thing I have to remind myself of with with the podcast. And I still today I listened to David Hawkins for the first 2 hours of my morning, just going, oh yeah, okay, right, truth, boom, here we go. I just needed a reminder, and heard things in a way that I wouldn't have heard it 5 years ago because I was in a different place. I have a greater level of understanding now, or a different perspective. But I forget sometimes, like, there are people out there who listen to my podcast and the guest on it and have that same kind of transformative experience if they apply the information they hear. I mean, it's really powerful. For me, like, audio learning has just been so huge. And so I think that's why I was kind of drawn to that medium more so than writing a blog or some of the other ways you can produce content. Like, listening to audio for me is like huge learning curve, major like cheat code to healing, awakening, understanding, expansion. So the fact that other people listen to some of my stuff and get that is like, wow, amazing. So cool.
It really is. Well, that's fantastic. It's been incredible to host you. I knew we would have a lovely conversation. Is there a
Likewise.
message? Yeah, good. Is there a message that you'd like to leave people with? If there's anything that these days, in this context where we're at, they're definitely going to try to pandemic us again. Do you think that's going to happen? What should people carry forward from here?
My message is, don't buy a webcam by this company called Opal.
All right.
This thing's been driving me freaking
They suck.
crazy.
All right.
I look like a cartoon and then it goes all blurry. I'm like, oh my God, this thing is so annoying. Have to practice acceptance and let go of my perfectionism, of my quality control of media. No, in all seriousness, I mean, this is like the razor's edge that I'm walking in terms of just looking at what's going on in the world. We're all naturally imbued with a need, a desire to know what's going on in the world, right? Like, there's a reason newspapers were invented. We want to know what's going on in our tribe, and our tribe now is worldwide, and however many billions of people that are on it. And so, with the level of access and immediacy we have to everything going on in the world all at once, we're not wired to be able to process that kind of information, especially when much of the information is bad news.
Yeah.
So we have kind of a negativity bias where our systems are built to be on the lookout for danger, and there's a lot of danger in the world that we would not know about if we weren't connected to it through media and through our technology. So it's always like this, for me, kind of a double-edged sword. It's the biggest blessing and the greatest curse at the same time. And writing that in a way that I can maintain my equanimity and my balance is challenging. I'll admit. I mean, I definitely don't have it mastered. There's a certain kind of addictive, compulsive draw that I feel toward like independent media. I'm not like obviously turning on CNN or Fox or something going, oh, what's going on in the world? I'm way past that, as I'm sure anyone that follows your work is. But even if you get into the Rumble and Telegram channels, and even X now is relatively free in terms of who can say what, still not that free, but if you want to find information that's more close to the truth than would be in legacy media, you can find it. And unfortunately, in legacy media, fear and doom sells, right? It sucks in your attention. The limbic system grabs onto it. And they figured that out a long time ago, which is how they propagandized all of us. But also in the alternative media, the same tactics are used, whether they're doing it intentionally or not, right? So you're not going to go in like a, truther Telegram group, including mine, by the way, and find good news and like feel good, memes and whatnot. You're going to find out all the worst things that are going on in the world at any given time. So we're kind of saddled with this desire to know what's going on, the abundant availability of information. A lot of that information is bad news. So how do we, how do we grapple with that and still find a sense of peace and equanimity? My own strategy has a lot to do with my kind of worldview and the way that I am able to make sense of this world and what we're all doing here. And I like to take a lot of time in meditation of various modalities where I can just kind of go into that theta state and disconnect myself from the beta brainwave state of like thinking, figuring out, looking, learning, all the things that are involved in keeping in touch with what's going on in the external world, and just really going internally. And what I find there in that place of spaciousness, that might be referred to as like the quantum field, right? And going to kind of the Joe Dispenza way of looking at these things. In those spaces, it's much easier for me to zoom out and have a more broad perspective on the melodramas of the human experience that are active when I open my eyes and come back and start finding out what's going on in the world. Meaning that I'm able to kind of remind myself that the snapshot of time upon which I'm basing my level of safety and security and everything is going to be okayness is completely ignorant of a broader spectrum of time in which everything is all good all the time. And that we're really, all that's happening is consciousness is just on a steady incline going higher and higher and higher over eons of what we perceive to be time, even though there's not really such thing as time, right? There's just a point at which you observe this thing that's called eternity, and we call that time. But if we go back 10,000, 20,000 years, right, things were a lot worse for humanity than they are now. You were a lot less safe. Predation, the elements, Viking hordes, the kind of battle that took place then, human sacrifices, on a large scales, et cetera, right? It was fucked up. Slavery would have been improvement based on what was happening before slavery, right? They would come in and just slaughter the entire village. They wouldn't have the wherewithal or the self-control to actually imprison them and put them to work somewhere, right? So if you zoom out really, really far, this is a thought experiment I like to do to keep myself sane and know that everything's okay. We're still making progress toward a higher evolution in terms of consciousness as a whole and our individual consciousness. What I see happening right now in the world is that the disparity and polarity in the spectrum of duality is so glaring and so extreme because the elevation of consciousness is happening so fast. So many human beings are waking up to who they really are and to the nature of reality and to the acknowledgement that there is a creator of some kind. Like, we're really having a quantum leap forward. And as we move into the light, it's having a really dramatic effect on illuminating the shadows where the cockroaches were once hidden. And so if you look at it from one perspective, it's like, holy shit, my kitchen is full of cockroaches. The kitchen has always been full of cockroaches. They were just in the dark. But we're turning our lights on and we're going, uh-oh, and it's terrifying to acknowledge, wow, the people that are running the world, the people who have the most wealth and the most control over humanity are not on the path of humanity at all, right? They're not for the well-being of humanity. They are an anti-life and anti-human sort of collective entity. And so it seems like they're very powerful because they're so loud and because we've never really seen them in such an overt way doing what they do. They've kind of managed to do things in the shadows, and now consciousness has evolved and we've created technology and means of communication and the internet and social media. There's now ways that we can shine a light on their nefarious activities. And on one side, it's terrifying, but on one side, it's the best thing ever because we can't see where we're going to be in 10 years, 50 years, 300, 500, 1,000 years from now. We'll look back on this not as the dark ages. Well, it'll be the dark ages in one sense, but we'll look back on this as like a Renaissance period, right? Where all of these old systems and institutions that were so built on fallacy and on selfishness and greed and control and violence and oppression and all of these things that none of us really want, we'll look back and see this awakening period, as much of a nightmare as it is to wake up sometimes, as the turning point when all of those systems became obsolete because the overall consciousness of humanity wouldn't tolerate it anymore. And so I don't know where we are in you know, in the timeline of that journey, but that's the only way that I can like wake up in the morning and not feel like they're coming to get me at any moment. We're all going to die. You know, it's like we give them, and it's even like the us and them paradigm isn't even right. Right. It's like, it's all part of consciousness. And the scary part of that we observe is the spectrum of the duality that we perceive to be evil, or as I said earlier, what I think is just like, it's devoid of love. In other words, evil doesn't have an existence. It's just the absence of love, right? Just like there's not a thing called darkness in reality. Darkness is just what's left when you take the light away. So when
Right.
you take the light of love away, what you're left with is just this void of a sewer, you know, which is what we see with the people that are, quote, leaders of the world for the most part. So that's what like enables me to have a sense of hope and to want to keep going and keep living and keep striving to wake up myself and hopefully inspire a few other people to wake up. And I don't know how much of this we'll see in our lifetime or my lifetime, but it's one hell of a ride. And it's unprecedented. I mean, humankind has never been where we are right now, ever. And we've never been where we're going. And there were just eons and eons of time in which we were essentially in the same place, doing the same shit.
Yeah.
And now it's different. And it's like, it's exponentially at the speed of light moving forward in the evolution of consciousness. And along the way, there's a lot of casualties, because what's required of us now to thrive and to hold on to our seats and like make it through this portal is not a quality that many human beings have. I think, you know, when you look at the masses of people that are just willing to sacrifice themselves at the altar of that darkness. I mean, it's astonishing that many people could be so easily deceived to their own detriment. I mean, it's shocking that the human mind is so incapable of discerning truth from falsehood. We are so gullible as a species. It's mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the beauty is that the power of love and the power of truth is so exponentially more powerful than that opposes it, that it doesn't matter if there's 7 billion people who are willing to walk into the guillotine. The 1 billion people who are awake and love their fellow humans and love themselves are able to tip the scale with 1 billion to counterbalance the 8 billion who are just walking into the abyss. And I truly believe that. You know,
Yeah.
that's been the case in my own life. I mean, going back to the microcosm of, you know, a 12-step meeting. You walk in a room, you got one person who's knocking on death's door. A few more days, they would probably be dead. They walk in a meeting full of people that are at a higher level of consciousness, that offer unconditional love and compassion to that person. And that one person who is, you know, on a fast track to death is healed and transformed almost instantaneously by 10 other people sitting there that just made it a little bit further and a little bit higher. And I think if we
Exactly.
expand that, you know, model into the macro, that's really what's going on. But it's still terrifying at times. I mean, I have to really regulate my nervous system because I see what's going on in the world. It's like I'm looking outside for the feds coming to get me because I talked about something on my podcast, or, you know, I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
undergo a medical treatment or whatever it is. I mean, I definitely, you know, feel a fair amount of anxiety. Look up at the sky, they're spraying me again. It's just like, oh my God, how do you like get away from these freaks?
Mm-hmm.
Like, leave me the fuck alone. I'm just trying to live my life, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the
Exactly.
last thing I'll say on this is a really interesting thing happened in the late 2020. You know, just in the heat of all of this drama that we're all familiar with, I I went and I went to a 5-MeO DMT ceremony where you smoke the toad of a toad called the Bufo alvarius, and it's not. I mean, to me, it's not even a psychedelic. It's a supernatural experience. I mean, it's just beyond. It's ineffable. It's beyond explanation or description. It's just the wildest thing ever, and it put me in a really beautified state for about 2-3 weeks where, I mean, I was just like on cloud nine. Nothing could bother me. And my phone and my access to the internet and social media was so abhorrent to me. I mean, it was like disgusting. I could care less about anything on my phone. Social media, I mean, you couldn't pay me to look at my phone. And what happened was all of the melodrama in the external world melted away. And I realized that literally in my personal immediate life, nothing was different whatsoever than it was before 2020. The only time I would be reminded that there was this big boogeyman coming to get us all was if I walked into Whole Foods and they chased me around and tried to make me put a diaper on my face, right? I would get a little reminder here and then I go, oh yeah, whoa, shit, I forgot that thing was even happening just because I disconnected from the internet for 2 or 3 weeks. But
Right.
it was a really beautiful lesson and like, oh wow, all of this that's, now I'm in a much more fearful state, I would say, than then, even though they're doing less of that stuff, they're doing other stuff,
Hmm.
you know. I would say I'm more bothered by it now, not because anything in my life has changed. In fact, my life is way better than it was in 2020. My marriage, my house, my finances, my health, everything is way better, but I'm more afraid. Why? Just because I take responsibility for that. I choose to check in on the world and all the shit that I think is happening. You
Right.
know,
Right.
it's like Ramana Maharshi said, don't bother trying to change the world because the world you see doesn't even exist. The world that we each see is a projection of our senses. It's a projection of what we perceive is what actually creates the world. And so you really can create your own reality based on your perception. So it's a matter of having the self-discipline to titrate how much perception of the external world I'm willing to take in. And the more of it I take in, the worse I feel typically.
Hmm.
So that for me is the dance,
Hmm.
is reminding myself that it's all an illusion and that I have chosen to participate in the illusion, and the degree to which I participate is going to be equal in measure to the degree to which I feel at ease in my body.
Nice.
And
Nice.
I still participate a lot more than I would like to.
Right, right. Yeah, for me, it's like this. There's a little, like the dip in. I'll be completely oblivious, and I'll hear a little blip here. And if people don't bring it directly to my Telegram group or directly, direct message me or something, then I'm just like, it's not in my perception. And I'll touch down. I'll look at it and from a distance. It's like, okay, yeah, that's kind of happening there, and fine line between denial and that childlike, just like, I don't see no hear, hear no evil, see no evil. I don't want to be like that either, but yeah, there's only so much that you can take in that is, it's just not something to grow and feed on, right? So that's why personally I'm committed to always creating a resource that has food, that when someone comes to my world, they're going to get full from that. And
Yeah.
that's the case with your work as well, very much. And that's the feedback that I get from people about your work. So, everyone, if you haven't already subscribed to the Lifestyle Podcast on your many platforms, it's on iTunes and Spotify and like the rest of them also. Do you have a,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
everywhere. Yeah.
it's
And
everywhere.
you have my podcast up there, and at my website, lukestory.com, is obviously links, and it's the mothership where we'll take you to wherever you want to go, whether you want to watch, listen, read, whatever. I have a really great, tightly curated wellness store where I recommend all of the biohacking technologies and things that I use here at home to keep myself vital through this crazy ass world.
There you go. Yeah, yeah, so much. Well, we could probably have four more conversations this length. I think this is a record
I'm
breaker,
sure.
by the way. Yeah, it was longer than yours and mine, and I believe
Cool.
longer than any other on here. Yeah, yeah, we could keep going forever. I still have, like, I don't know, 2 pages of questions, but we'll let it go for now.
All right.
And yeah,
We'll do a part two.
okay, fantastic.
It's funny. Yeah. I can talk obviously, but your questions are great, and they're all things that I'm really passionate about exploring. So I'm like, it's no shock to me if you bring up those kind of topics. We're going to be 3.5 hours to get through 10 questions or something. It's just like, oh man, I got a lot to say. Plus, I've been bottled up because I haven't done an interview in quite some time. So
I know what that's like. You are an excellent interviewer, and it was a joy for me because I often am not getting asked the questions unless it's in my personal world of more a teaching context. So yeah, I loved it. It was a luxury to be asked the questions as well. So I'm glad to
Awesome.
reciprocate, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, look forward to staying connected. And my son said to tell you that if you ever need someone to house sit, he'll be there.
Oh, epic, epic.
Yeah, yeah,
That's not
yeah,
completely out of the realm of possibilities. That does happen from time to time because a lot of our friends here, they have their own lives and kids and houses and like, I don't know. They're like, "What? I already have a house. I don't need to house it." You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
keep that in mind. Tell
yeah.
them thank you, and I will definitely bear that one in mind.
Okay, fantastic. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'm just going to let people know before we jump off. If you feel like you need to go, then feel free. But Journey Code is coming up. That is my coaching certification training, where I help people to not only deprogram and learn to work with archetypes and find themselves on the map of purpose, but also so that you would gain those skills to do that for others and be a not only a coach, but potentially a movement leader and an example for others of how you can grow and heal very quickly and be part of this morphogenetic field that is quickening and making it easier and easier for the work that used to be. We're still in the trenches. I feel like, but there's this curve now. There's something where people are able to step into it. Like you said, the fellow who was coming in very severe addiction, but he's surrounded by 10 people who have healed. And then that curve, all of a sudden he can just get in the slipstream draft of that and get it. So that's my dream. I am looking for the masculine element to come and balance our feminine. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't happen, but you probably, if you guys are already on my email list, you'll be hearing about that. You can always do an archetype quiz. I regret not asking you to do that, Luke. It takes just about 10 minutes. You haven't done my quiz, have you?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll send
Send
you
me
the
the
link
link and I'll do
description.
it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Find out which archetype you're at now. It's a photograph of a moving picture, so it tells you where you're going to find more shadows, more gifts, and have more benefit to work at that point in that time on the hero's journey.
Cool. I'd love to do it.
Yeah, I always mean to send my guests, and somehow I don't.
It's all good.
But yeah. Yeah. All right, everyone. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and definitely go check out lukestory.com, where that's the road that all the Rome's come from. Is that something like that?
Something
It's the
like
other way
that.
around. Anyway, yeah, yeah. All right. Lots of love, everyone. Bye for
You
now.
too.
I'm
Okay.
gonna I'm gonna
Cheers.
play us out with Liam again.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.